At local noon in a radio control room, I catch a structured silence as 3. I skims by Mars, no coma, clean calibrations, a
Không phải
drift
bầu
that
trời
tracks
trống,
geometry, not heat, and I
là
have
im
to
lặng
choose
đang nín
action
thở.
over comfort. At local noon, the array did something a machine should not. It hushed. It was not the hush of empty sky. It was a pause with edges, a silence holding its breath. Fan noise tugged at the room. Heat shimmered above racks. A dot on my monitor steadied where it should sway. 3I, the Atlas visitor between stars, slid near Mars, and the meter should chatter, yet went still. I said to no one, this silence sounds like intent. 3I, the third interstellar wanderer we have caught, is not a shy rock. The first one, Oumuamua, played tricks with light and motion. The second, Borisov, grew a clean tail like a classic comet. This new traveler tracks a lean line toward the sun and skims by Mars today. We have its position, brightness, color. What we do not have yet is a reason for the small, stubborn drift. The astrometric residuals, those tiny aftertastes of position, should scatter like dust. Instead, they bead into a line that leans. Frame after frame, the fit tries to pull it straight. Frame after frame, the sky refuses. My cursor hovers over the numbers, arc seconds, timestamps, confidence. I expect random. I get rhythm. In this room, the clock clicks like a metronome, and the dots nod in time, a reluctant march away from gravity alone. Not much, but repeating, insistent. I sweep through the model like a mechanic under a strange engine. Solar mass, Martian tug, higher terms I rarely touch. I toggle ephemerides, nudge time, reset integration steps. Tick-tick, enter. The screen blinks, redraws. In each run, the physics tries to be kind, to bend toward what I want, and fails. The path that should sag by heat and light refuses to obey heat or light at all. Fine, blame the tools. I pull up calibration logs, dark frames quiet as linen, bias frames even as a ruler, flats smooth as milk poured slow, antenna gain stable, system temperature steady within patient limits. No alarms in the night, no storms over the dish, no cable shaken loose by a careless hand. I rerun the pipeline from raw, same lean line, same nodding drift. Blaming the wrench does not fix a bent law. The fault refuses to be equipment. I stack today against the others we met. Oumuamua gave us a push without a puff, but its light curve hinted at something thin. Borisov wore dust and gas like a flag. This visitor glows steady and spare. No tail through the filters, no fuzzy coma to blame for thrust. If this is gas, it hides like a perfect lie, timed to our heartbeat, invisible to every color we throw. So I cage my fear inside 2 safe boxes. Box 1, there is outgassing too subtle for sight, pushing from some shaded seam. Box 2, the process cheats me, a silent bias slipped into my steps. I test both by time. The drift waxes and wanes, but not with sunlight, not with heat load, not with our known mechanical ghosts. It hums with some other clock, one I do not yet own. The boxes feel tidy, the data does not. I ping the network, the quiet chain of stations that trust one another when the sky gets strange. Send stamps, plots, raw links. Calls come back in patient voices. Hold, breathe, wait for the evening optical pass. I keep the channel open anyway. I do not want a label. I want a fact. A small prayer forms without permission. Do not let me be dramatic. Let me be correct, please. The day is a short corridor. By late afternoon, Mars sinks toward a heat-shaken horizon. Then the dish will ride low and deaf. Clouds gather over the ridge. The forecast calls for a grumpy wind by evening. We fought for this block, wrote memos, traded nights, promised results. Hours are coins. If I am wrong, I spend them on a mirage. If I am right, delay will cost a proof we may not get again. Clocks do not care. I rotate the scene in my head, like a wire model in light. Sun here, Mars there, the traveler between. The residual swells not with warmth but with angle. Nearest alignment, largest push. Widest angle, quiet again. It is not heat, it is geometry. The words taste wrong and true at once, like telling a friend a secret you should not know. The pattern could be coincidence, but it persists. I stop chasing comfort and start writing orders. Freeze the pipeline at raw. Duplicate every file to cold storage. Annotate the run with my name and the hour. request a supplemental slot from the southern dish for the last viable window. Draft a note to the optical team about a possible shadow test when Mars edges the line in days to come. Do not write the word anomaly, do write the word repeatable. Keep my voice steady on the net. I kill speakers and keep fans. The room stays busy with small weather, sounds that have never lied to me in this place. A printer wakes and spits the one plot that will not bow. I hold the page at arm's length as if the angle might forgive me. I hear my own breath. I let the truth out, quiet and whole. Something is very wrong with 3i. We call it 3i because names are vows. Interstellar, not ours. Visitor, not citizen. Atlas raised the first quiet flag. The designation settled on every header, and with it a constraint. Speak carefully. I write the letters as if ink could slow celestial intent. It cannot. A name like this is less a label than a promise to count again. I keep the promise. I say it aloud, softly, and watch the plot hold its breath. The discovery seemed modest. A streak on a night the sky behaved. Cross-checks landed where they should. Parallax cleared. Tracklets refused to fray. The classifier nudged toward unusual without drama. Other eyes tightened the arc. When it reached my desk, the candidate felt real enough to deserve doubt. We checked the usual bins. Near Earth, no. Main belt, no. Trojan, no. The remaining drawer reads Interstellar, and that drawer does not open without care. The orbit chose freedom. The fit took a hyperbola cleanly and would not give it back. Speed above solar escape with room to spare. That is the quiet test. Subtract the star, and the guest still refuses a leash. Not performance, not brag, a simple refusal to belong. Freedom looks like a flat line and can pass as dull. I traced the arc and felt thrill and dread switch places. Flat can mean honest. It can also mean unforgiving. Mars offered a geometry made for clean work. Sun, Mars, visitor, 3 points. A narrow wedge. If you want gravity without excuses, you ask for this. Fewer thermal tantrums. Fewer talks you did not order. A tidy wind tunnel in the sky. That is why the lean in the residual felt like a hairline crack in new glass. And I had expected quiet. I did not expect repetition. Rhythm is the one thing noise should never have. Light told a strict story. Color stayed centered and refused gossip. The phase curve ran smooth, almost smug. No halo, no dust, no soft coma to blame for thrust. Radio agreed by refusing to argue. Silence with edges. If anything left the surface, it left under every band we own. Brightness rose and dipped with angle alone. Not heat, geometry. The pendulum moved because of where we stood, not because the rock had warmed into motion. Size hid behind albedo. Bright means small, dark means large. I can write ranges until the page sighs and still not know which world I inhabit. I imagine skins, polished, soot matte, frost fine as breath. The truth is a door I can touch and not open. Estimation is the rental I live in while I wait for ownership. It keeps out weather. It does not keep out doubt. Doubt drafts through every modelled window. Non-gravitational pushes are where faith goes brittle. Oumuamua twitched without a visible engine and made us argue about sails and foams. Borisov wore a clean tail and soothed us with familiar physics. 3. I declines to confide. I test vents that let vapor sneak from shadow. I try area to mass games a wafer would love. The lean refuses the gears I offer. The residual keeps its own beat, like a second clock somewhere I cannot see. We never work alone. High-dry optics feed angles that taste like snow. Radar friends, when geometry allows, throw careful pulses and send back absence that still matters. Radio arrays keep vigil at noon when glass would drown. The network is patience turned into steel and schedules. We sign frames like carpenters sign beams no one will see. We trust and then verify with a meanness that protects trust. This is the closest thing I have to faith. Error is a map, I walk it. Systematic first. Dark, bias, flats, gain, pointing, thermal creep, cables, clocks. Random, next, sky noise, seeing, gusts, the petty malice of weather. Modeling then. Ephemerides, higher gravity terms, tolerances. I must not relax. Human always, bias, fatigue, pride. Lines through the list, hardware steady, logs clean, sky behaved as skies behave. What survives the crossing is not a shrug, it is a remainder with teeth, and it bites. Against our first two visitors, this one stays severe. Oumuamua's light curve whispered thinness. Borisov carried ice and dust like confession. 3i is spare, almost pious. Refusing to glow at the edges would be admirable if it did not bring a drift that refuses to die. I am not shopping for wonder. I am shopping for cause. Wonder is cheap. Cause is rent. The day pays only for one, and the landlord audits every receipt. I keep 3 boxes in my head, natural but subtle, artificial but patient, our fault but hidden. The middle box makes enemies, so I lock it and only peek. The first holds vapor below thresholds, jets in slivers, chemistry allergic to publicity. The last forces me to invite colleagues who delight in proving me wrong. They are very good at it. They are happiest when I am mistaken. I invest in their happiness and call it safety. Tests volunteer like chores. Spectra, deeper and slower. Polarization to see whether grains align and gossip when pushed. More radio across more bands, chasing a silence that feels designed. If Mars grants alignment, an occultation could sharpen the blade. A shadow lacks poetry, but it keeps score. Either the star dims by the number we predict, or I return to my list with an apology. I can live with either. The clock cannot. The clock never blinks. Midway, I rehearse discipline. Memos breathe. Reporters wait. Freedom of information is not an enemy, but it does not nap. We owe the public patience, not theatre. We name before we speculate. We call it 3i because we know what we do not yet know. Naming is restraint. Restraint is hard when the plot twitches under your hand like trapped wire. Let it twitch. Keep your hands open. Count out loud so the room remembers the rules. Time is tighter than error. We hold windows, not halls. Schedules collide with weather, grants and politics that eats minutes for breakfast. I am careful with metaphors because they waste seconds. I prefer lists, timestamps, notes a lawyer could read without sighing. The story can wait until the story is true, so I call a friend and say nothing for 1 minute. Then I send the plot. He asks the right thing. What does the timeline say? I open the dates. Logs align, almost. A thin offset stands where none should. Not loud, but real. The timeline is cracking. I follow the split. I pull every log I can touch. Headers from image files, system notes, paper notebooks with coffee rings, schedules penciled by tired hands. I pin them on a single line across the wall. Here is the rule I speak out loud, slow and clear. If the time is wrong, everything is wrong. I will not chase glamour. I will chase seconds. The sky can be dramatic. Clocks must be boring. I need boring to win. We start with time itself. I map everything to one spine. Coordinated universal time governs the wall clock. International atomic time steadies the seconds beneath it. Barycentric dynamical time moves the equations to the solar system center of mass. I document leap seconds, rounding schemes, and the exact moment each instrument stamps an exposure. No clever shortcuts, no assumptions. Time is a language. I will translate every dialect before I speak about the sky. First, exposure time is not a point. It can mean the start, the middle, or the end of a frame. One station marks the midpoint by policy, another marks the last photon captured. Those choices look tiny on paper and loud inside math. I back out midpoints from end stamps, then rebuild end stamps from midpoints. The correction nudges each position a hair, small but coherent. Error loves randomness. This shift prefers order, and that preference matters when the pattern repeats. Light needs time to cross space, so I pay that debt. I shift stamps to when the photons left, not when they kissed the glass. I convert times to the solar system center and correct Earth rotation. I subtract the wobble of the planet and the small delay the ionized sky can add. Each fix cleans a smudge, none erases the lean. The line still tilts where gravity says flat. I audit the clocks next. A network says they agree. That is not enough. I read the list of time servers and the rules that vote when two disagree. I check the local atomic source that hums under the floor and its monthly health checks. I scan for gaps, resets, and angry red flags. There are hiccups, but none touch the nights in question. Drift stays inside the narrow limits we swear to keep. Boring survives. The lean does too. Human hands leave prints. I read shift notes, initials, jokes in margins. One night a tech rounded a time to a second to match a report. I recreate the path and carry that change through math. The effect exists, but it does not sing the tune I hear. It does not repeat across stations. It does not grow with angle. It cannot be the author of the pattern nagging me. I lay the residuals over a calendar of sky geometry. Phase angle climbs and the leftover grows with it. Phase angle falls and the leftover relaxes. Temperature logs slide past with no handshake. The midday heat pulse does not move the points. The night breeze does not move them either. The pattern nods when Mars and Sun draw the angle tight, then quiets when they spread. It is not a weather map. It is a compass. I underline the curve. I ask for a blind check from a station far away. I send times and fields, not conclusions. They run their own reduction with their own habits and their own mistakes. A day later, a plot arrives. The drift carries the same tilt at the matching hours, different mirrors, different air, the same small refusal to sit still under gravity alone. I feel my shoulders rise and stay there, higher. Definition fights hide in the margins. One group reports times as seen from the hill where the dome sits. Another converts immediately to the center of mass frame and forgets the hill. We argue without anger, and we redo the books both ways. The differences show up in the fourth decimal place and leave the rhythm untouched. Noise bows. The song continues. It is a gentle lesson in humility and a hard lesson in persistence. The shape does not change. I stand in the doorway and say what I have avoided. The clocks agree. The sky does not. It lands like a small stone on a large lake. Ripples touch every screen and every plan. There is no scandal in that sentence, only duty. If timekeeping is sound, then the breach is elsewhere. I feel lighter and more worried at the same instant. We will act like scientists now together. I drop into the code that no one loves and that everyone needs. I rework the interpolation that moves us from the observatory to the center of mass. I change step sizes in the integrator and let runs breathe longer. I add higher gravity terms that usually live asleep. I try 3 different starting states and 3 different fit windows. The line leans in every case. Phase keeps the beat. Heat does not get a vote. It refuses my edits. The calendar shows the bend by Mars like a red pin. At closest approach, the leftover swells, proud and smooth. As distance grows, the leftover shrinks, as if tired. It is a soft curve, not a saw. No daily heat surge maps onto it. No midnight calm does either. This is angle talking. This is the sky insisting on a geometry I did not ask for. I mark it twice. I close the audit. The timeline is cracked. There is no safe place left for a petty flaw to hide. Every vein we traced runs to one organ, the bend near Mars. The next step cannot be a memo. It must be a test under the sky. I sharpen a pencil and write in the margin what I would rather not see. Not heat, geometry, and a shadow test when the planet offers an edge. The room hums. If the sky is right, my model is wrong. I accept that and prepare the case for the bend. Mars decides next. I stand before the bend and draw the triangle in my mind. Sun at one point, Mars at another. Our visitor threads the third. Space offers a natural wind tunnel if you choose the right shape. Gravity alone should set the rules. Clean forces, clean math. A simple stage where heat and noise fade. Today the geometry is perfect, ruthless and bright. If anything is wrong here, it will show itself. The bend is where truth likes to live, patiently. The clean prediction is simple. Integrate the path in the frame of the system's center of mass. Use the known constants. Let the numbers fall without romance. Residuals should scatter like dust. No rhythm, no lean. A traveler near Mars should obey the tug we already understand. We expect boredom dressed as accuracy. The forecast is not a poem. It is a ledger where every entry balances, line by line. The sky declines to follow the ledger. As the approach tightens, the leftover swells. As the distance grows, the leftover falls. Frame by frame, the points lean the same way, as if the plot had a shoulder. The pattern locks to the changing angle, not to noon or midnight, not to warm metal or cold mirrors. It is a pulse set by shape. That should not happen if heat rules. But heat does not rule here. The angle keeps time, so I add the weight of relativity. I bend light in the sums and pay the Shapiro toll. I let time run through curved space the way textbooks teach. Each correction nudges the numbers closer to polite. None of them erases the rhythm. The beat survives the math class and keeps tapping under my finger. First-order terms behave, higher-order terms whisper, then go quiet again. The curve resists. Mars is not a perfect sphere, so I honor that truth. I fold in the second zonal harmonic, the tilt of the axis, the small stubborn bulges. I ask whether an off-center spin can fake a push. I try variations that engineers once warned me never to touch without coffee and calm. The effect is tidy, real, and too small. It cannot raise the swell I see, nor can it sync with the angle that drives the leftover. Today, I count the little moons because respect demands it. Phobos and Deimos tug in measured whispers. Their pull is honest and shy. I model them cleanly and watch the lines stay the same. They are not the author of this tune. They are the quiet audience in a far seat. I check ephemerides from separate sources, and the conclusion repeats with calm clarity. Small moons do not write big lies. I walk the gravity field of Mars the way a surveyor walks a ridge. Start with the mass and the standard gravitational parameter. Climb into harmonics, not just the second term but the chorus after it. Map the plateaus where mass hides, the loads that left dents under planes. Tharsis to the west, Utopia to the east. These are not stories, they are weights. Our references come from years of orbiters circling, sounding, refining. Uncertainties remain, but they are bounded and polite. I swap in alternate field solutions. I change fit windows and shift weights. Outcome refuses drama. None of these choices can grow a phase-locked sway of the size I measure. Model is thorough, the remainder keeps shape. I stop and breathe, then write the sentence I have avoided. The math is clean, the bend is not. If the field we know is in order, then the disorder lives elsewhere. I do not enjoy that thought, but I do not fear it either. Fear wastes windows. We act, we test. We let the sky deliver a verdict without our wish. Simplicity is not surrender, it is discipline. I repeat the line until the room believes me, and me. I test the easy culprits next. Radiation pressure is honest about area and mass. Give the traveler a generous surface and a modest weight, and you still fall short. The solar wind hisses, but its push lacks the right timing. No tail to catch, no vapor to blame. The thrust a comet would give is absent. The phase still leads, and the numbers refuse that old story. It stays wrong. Plasma can light a radio if you let it. I measure the ionized sky and fold in the delay it adds. I anchor the correction with beacons we trust. I change bands to see whether the silence moves with frequency. It does not. The structured hush near Mars is not a trick of charged air. It is a property of the scene itself. Planetary plasma sheaths can bruise a signal, but the bruise would scale differently. Our tests disagree, utterly. Could a thin ring of dust around Mars cheat the light and our eyes? We look for a glow, for a reddening, for any soft veil. Optics come back plain. No matching smear appears in the images. The idea refuses to hold weight without a partner in sight. We shelve it, not with scorn, but with care. Absence is not proof, but presence would be loud here. It is not. I gather the pieces on one table. Predictions from gravity alone behave. Relativistic trimming helps and then stops helping. Mars's shape and small moons do their duty and then bow out. Radiation pressure and wind strike too softly and at the wrong times. Plasma delays refuse the pattern. Dust lacks a witness. What remains is a structured mismatch tied to where Mars sits, not how warm the rock feels. It is an argument built by exclusions and a stubborn rhythm. So the next step leaves the desk. We design a lean occultation when Mars edges the line. A star will wink or not by numbers we can predict ahead of time. We schedule parallel radio in several bands to chase the noon silence. 2 tests, 1 sky. If the rhythm repeats under these rules, the case grows teeth. If it fails, we eat our notes and start again, with gratitude. I study the board and accept the boundary of what today can prove. If Mars is not the floor, then the mirror might be, or the sensor, or the code that smooths raw sky into comfort. The only honest way forward is to make the tools confess. I write the next order in small, neat letters, so I cannot dodge it later. Next, we test the whisper in our instruments. We listen for hum, for bias, for ghosts that hide. I make a promise before I touch a screw. If the sky is right, every instrument must be willing to confess. On tape across the console, I write my list: optics, shutter, detector, timing. Radio chain, software. Then I cross out the word noise and write signal with a question mark. The room hums. I breathe with it. I start with light, because light is honest when you do not rush it. I measure the point spread function with standard stars and compare it to past nights with similar seeing. I watch the full width at half maximum roll with wind and temperature. Focus drift follows the hour. Nothing tracks the changing sun, Mars, and visitor angle. Shutters can lie with timing, so I test travel time in a slow ladder of exposures. I check whether the recorded midpoint matches the true midpoint. I map small offsets in opening and closing. I redo timestamps for a perfect shutter and for a lazy shutter. The lean tied to Mars does not flinch. Detectors have tempers. I scan for non-linearity by stepping through brightness like a careful pianist. I measure charge transfer inefficiency by watching electrons slip between pixels. I apply the standard correction and then a stricter one. The phase refuses to move. Astrometry is where pride hides, so I invite it into light. I solve the field with two engines. One finds centroids by fitting a soft peak. The other fits the full point spread function. I flip between star catalogs. The world's solution jitters, the pattern stays. Calibration frames are the diet the pipeline eats. I build master bias, master dark, and master flat by night and by week. I permute the order and ask the code to keep up. The corrected images differ like twin leaves, not like seasons. The geometry beat survives. Now to radio, the room that held noon so still. I comb the spectrum for radio frequency interference that smells like a city and drop every contaminated slice. I test bandpass stability, track gain and phase against a beacon, and map side lobes so a stray tower cannot haunt me. The structured silence remains. Phase noise in the local oscillator can smear a beat. I measure it with patient tools. I swap the reference distribution and feed the chain with a cleaner clock. I look for spurs in the analog to digital converter and tap the sampler with tones. Jitter lives, but the noon signature does not bend. We run blind tests because we do not trust our own hope. I inject an artificial comet push into raw frames at a level the pipeline should catch, and it does. I remove the injection and it reports nothing. We repeat with other hands. The code passes the exam we tried to make it fail. We cut the data like a loaf to see whether rot hides in one slice. Split by telescope, split by night, split by hour. Reverse signs, remove edges, keep cores. The geometry beat endures in every fair cut. It dies only when I ruin the experiment. Hardware cultivates superstition, so I swap it. New camera, then backup camera, primary dish to secondary dish and back. New cables, different clock fan out. Amplitude shifts a little as gains shuffle, but the phase does not. The rhythm returns on schedule, as if a calendar hangs above the rack. Midway I say the sentence out loud so everyone hears my spine. If this is a whisper from the instrument, it repeats only when Mars turns the key. The room goes still. We stare at monitors as if flat eyes could blink answers. They never do. Human hands can tilt scales, so I hide labels and scramble file names. Random identifiers and shuffled frames keep us honest. I ask a colleague who dislikes my ideas to reduce the data blind. He returns the same tilted residuals and a bored shrug. We swap roles and repeat the test. Blind buys calm, not new answers. The ghost persists. Power and ground can curse a measurement, so I hunt those older ghosts. I watch every rail for ripple as air handlers cycle. I warm and cool front ends on purpose and look for a hinge. I break and rebuild a ground bond, then reseat shields. Lines breathe, then settle. The noon signature sits through each ritual, almost bored, unimpressed. I add a spare chain in parallel from feed to recorder, so one failure cannot charm me. A borrowed recorder writes the same sky to a separate cage. A station across the valley joins for a day. With their timing and dish, their data lands with the same lean. We invite an optical friend to point at a nearby bright star for control during our passes. Nothing tracks heat, everything tracks angle. Angle rules again. Statistics get the last word before people do. I jackknife by station and by hour, then bootstrap the residuals for false rhythm. I drop every third frame and rerun the fit. I leave out nights one by one, then add synthetic planets to test guilt by proximity. The geometry beat holds phase with Sun, Mars and Visitor, not preference. It endures. I move to timing and electronics, the cradle of every ghost. I read specification sheets like scripture and confirm the analog path from sky to sampler. I verify the exact road a timestamp takes from pulse to header and compare the console clock to a separate atomic box. Drift stays inside limits. The nights with the largest lean sit far from any clock event. Silence is data, so I listen again at noon. I change bands and point to a control source. The quiet with edges follows geometry, not my dial. Last, I print the pipeline code and lay pages across the floor. Bias subtraction, dark subtraction, flat fielding, cosmic ray culling, astrometric solution, photometry, quality flags. The same rhythm appears, the same lean nods. Within limits, the instruments are innocent. I write one more line and send for people who hope to prove me wrong. Protocol red line awaits. I tape a sheet to the door that says Protocol red line. No comfort, no ceremony. We test before we trust. Rule 1, nobody has to believe me, only the data may earn belief. Now, I hand over keys to raw files, logs, and source. Chain of custody begins now. Hashes, timestamps, sign-offs. Red team gets power to repeat, reverse, and remove. If an assumption breaks, it stays broken. Nothing moves without an audit trail. We begin with humility and bright lights. 3 branches arrive: optics, radio, and statistics. Different labs, different loyalties, no shared grants. Their mandate is independence, even rudeness. They sign disclosure terms and a publication freedom clause. They may publish over my objections. The ethos is simple and hard. The more you can break, the safer the science. Independence. We define the field. Every file is checksummed, time-stamped, and traced from disk to desk. Every code release is sealed, versioned, and archived. No silent fixes. Pre-processing steps are listed like cargo in a manifest. Requests for additional data must be specific. When they ask, I provide only raw. Interpretation is their job. Delivery is mine. Requests must cite file names, exposure ranges, and reasons. Phishing expeditions die at the door with the ghosts of bias. No exceptions, no excuses. They pre-register analyses. Methods, stopping rules, and rejection thresholds live on paper before code runs. No retrospective phishing expeditions. Multiple testing penalties are agreed up front. Success criteria are blunt. Find a fault or push the posterior for instrument error to insignificance. Power to stop a run lies with them. We agree to publish nulls. We agree to public logs. No private side channels, no oral edits. Everything is written down. They seize the blind switches. Synthetic thrusts are injected into raw frames without my knowledge. Timestamps are permuted. Frame orders are shuffled. They hide toggles inside a private fork of the pipeline. They decide who is blind and when. I become a technician who follows orders. We force noise and signal to declare themselves. They flip time, color, and telescope tags to burn away habit. They watermark cases I will never see. Failure earns applause. Success, suspicion, no mercy, either. Everything runs inside pinned containers. Operating systems are fixed. Libraries are frozen. Random seeds are recorded. Performance reports are attached. If results drift while the software does not, we raise a red flag. If they match, the next step must be harsher. Hardware fingerprints are recorded alongside checksums. GPU models, firmware revisions, kernel versions, all pinned. Reboots are counted like heartbeats and noted in margins. Nothing drifts without a witness. They rebuild from scratch. A different star catalog. Centroids by full PSF fits, not Gaussians. A different astrometric solver. Outlier rules rewritten. No line of my code survives the port. Their plot appears, and the residual leans again, phase locked to Mars. Same direction, same timing, within errors. They alter weighting schemes, swap fit windows, and loosen priors I had tightened. Still the lean returns, patient and repeatable, as if geometry were writing in ink. Their ink will not fade. Their spokesperson reads without warmth. We break your comfort. The pattern does not break. Silence follows, as if the room forgets to breathe. I record the sentence, date it, and draw a square around it. Signal survives independent reduction. The words hang like frost across the consoles. No one cheers. Someone exhales a curse in a language I do not know. I underline the phrase twice. I accept the verdict. They raid timing and electronics. Clocks are cross-checked against a separate atomic box. ADC spurs are mapped. Ground loops are provoked and then healed. Cables are swapped and reseated. They inject noise, distort waveforms, and search for a Mars-keyed beat. Manufactured faults leave different fingerprints, not geometric rhythm. They detune amplifiers, lift shields, and clock the system from a portable maser. Nothing coaxes the residue into obeying their sabotage. The beat refuses theatre and keeps time. Still no. They try the politest natural model. Vents in shadow, jets at glancing sun. Predictions coupled to insulation and local heat. Our data refuses that coupling. No coma, no tail, no spectral whispers. The observed rhythm cleaves to angle, not temperature. A tidy model is comforting, but comfort is not evidence. We swing the telescope through thermal swings, and the numbers ignore the heat we force upon them. Heat stays irrelevant. They draw a table. Natural but subtle remains open. Sail-like structure lacks optical support. Process error is demoted. Official orders: run a lean occultation when Mars gives the edge, and pair it with multiband radio. Independent code paths must stand ready. We agree to publish the pre-registered plan. They stamp the plan with dates, roles, and a promise of release, regardless of outcome. If the sky disappoints us, we will say so in print, quickly. No embargo, no hedging. I nod and accept their sequence. Prove nature first, or let nature refuse. We start with carbon, ice, and the beautiful ordinary. If the sky rejects gentleness, we will harden. Next, I open the folder labeled Hypothesis 1. I sharpen a pencil and write the title on the board in neat block letters. The room settles. We will start where explanations usually live and see. Start with the ordinary first. I begin with a vow. Prove the ordinary first. If nature can carry the load, everything else must go quiet. I clear the board. I write 3 words over the plots. Carbon, ice, sunlight. They look calm. They always do at the start. I try to make my voice match them. I fail and try again. Then I open the files and ask the sky for patience and for evidence that does not need theatre. A dustless jet is the gentlest suspect. Gas slips from a shaded seam and gives a small push. In that case, the telescope should see almost nothing but not zero. A faint haze, a softening of the point spread, a brightness curve that wobbles with heat. Radio might hear ions if the sun catches a column. Infrared might glow a little where warmth gathers. Photometry sets the first ceiling. The comet dust proxy called AF-RO, written out, so I keep my language plain, stays below the level where dust would matter. No halo grows, no tail lifts. The light curve runs smooth, almost smug. Boring would be peace if the drift did not lean in time with shape. I want to declare dustless thrust enough. The numbers refuse it. I sketch the thermal stage at the distance of Mars. Light for warmth, dark for cold. Water ice asks for more heat to roar, but it can murmur. Carbon dioxide needs less and can move if a seam is fresh. Carbon monoxide needs even less. I trace the energy budget like a neat receipt. If venting rules, the force should breathe with sunlight, not geometry. Rotation could complicate the song. If a nozzle rides the subsolar point, thrust should pulse once per spin. If a nozzle sits at a fixed crack, sunlight keys the timing and the drift tracks heat. We coax a rotation period from small wiggles in the light curve. We feed that period into the model like a metronome, then listen for a match. The match does not arrive. I build a simple thrust model by hand, ugly but honest. Mass, area, latent heat, exhaust speed, momentum per second. I set the force needed to reproduce the residual at closest approach. Then I ask how much gas must leave the surface to make that push. The answer demands more venting than our ceilings allow. We would have seen it. We did not. Spectra get a turn at truth. We hunt for water, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide emission. We look where lines should rise above noise if the gas is real. They do not rise. We search the thermal infrared for the warm skin of an active face. The detector stays level. Another tidy null, not loud, steady. It chips at the case like water-working stone. Seasons on a small world are a reach, but we test them. A crack in shadow, a pit that only the right angle can wake. If such a source drives the push, the drift should lock to sunlight and to local heat. The data refuses and locks to geometry instead. The phase between planets writes the beat, not the little furnace inside the rock. I oblige the sun as a pusher of last resort. Pressure on area over mass. A lit sheet would help, but we have no sheet, only a rocky guess. On reasonable shapes, the force misses by a factor comfort cannot excuse. The slow thermal recoil called the Yarkovsky effect does not fit the short stage near Mars. The Yorp torque cannot turn fast enough to matter this week. We add polarimetry because tiny grains betray themselves in scattered light. If dust hides, polarization should lift at large phase angles. We do not see the lift. The degree stays flat inside error and refuses to vote. Another modest null, quiet and clear. The ordinary keeps retreating one step at a time, polite and unhelpful, and the drift keeps time with angle. Radio earns a fresh look because our noon silence is one of the strangest facts we own. If an ionized jet laced the line of sight, our bands would carry its signature. Instead, the signature we record is absence with structure. It does not scale with expected electron density. It does not vary with heat. It follows changing geometry like a dog at heel. Midway, I stop prosecuting and say the thing that offends me. If nature is guilty, she hides better than the physics allows. I hate that sentence. It feels like theater, so I claw back to data and try to earn it. We pile the nulls and mismatches on a single page. We keep the green checks for every ordinary test that could have declared victory. A gentler alternative survives in theory. Many tiny vents, each too small for one test, might add to the measured push. We build that quilt with plausible chemistry and let obliquity change, which patch wakes as the traveler spins. The sum follows sunlight. The data follows angle. The beat lives where Mars sits, not where warmth collects. I revisit mass and albedo to ease force budget. Reflective skin could shrink the body and lower the thrust. Dark skin does the opposite. Parameter sweeps help, but not enough. A dustless jet could squeak by only if two ceilings break at once. That price is not payable. I call the red team to kick these natural models. They agree on words I do not like, plausible in the abstract, inadequate in the measured world. We have not slain the natural, but we have fenced it. Slender paths remain, each a demand for tuning near prayer. A jury would ask for a better case. I owe that case. I cross out two words on the board. Vapor wins. I look at the triangle of sun, Mars and traveler. Angle owns the rhythm. Heat does not. The noon silence keeps its edge. A column waits, thin. If not vapor, then surface. Thin and wide and wrong. I draw the sleekest version first. A thin sheet rides sunlight. Pressure pushes. Torque nudges attitude. No vapor, no tail, just area over mass doing quiet work. If I want a sail, I can almost see it. If I want truth, I must compute until wanting stops. Solar radiation pressure writes clean math. Force scales with reflectivity, with the cosine of the angle, and with 1/over distance squared to the sun. Direction points away from the star. If this is the engine, the residual should hum to the sun's rhythm, not to Mars. I run it on paper, then in code. The tune stays wrong. Area over mass is where the dream cracks. And to reach the extra push we measure, the traveler needs a sheet so wide brightness would brag, or a mass so small plasma would toy with it. Photometry does not support a mirror that grand. Dynamics do not support a feather that meek. Between those cliffs, little ground remains. A mirror makes promises it cannot keep quiet. Specular facets throw flashes. Glints stab light curves when attitude lines up. We search for spikes. We find none. The curve is smooth as a throat cleared. If there is a sail, it hides from geometry with discipline I cannot justify. Polarization is the gossip a sail cannot hush. A shiny sheet inflates polarization at broad phase angles. We measure and remeasure. The degree stays dull. The phase function remains polite, too polite for a sheet hungry for photons. Dynamics insist. A torn sail spins badly. A kinked sail precesses. If thrust couples to attitude, acceleration and brightness should dance off time. Instead, brightness behaves and the lean keeps time with Mars. Behavior refuses to rotate into place. I test a kinder picture, a modest matte panel, foil scuffed by years. Lower reflectivity, lower glints, lower polarization. Then the force drops, and I return to area over mass. To regain push, I must add surface or delete mass until the object becomes toy fragile. Radio should hear edges talk. Data stays calm. What about Mars itself, lending a hand? Planet shine exists. Sunlight bounces off the red world and leaks weak pressure. I compute along our sightline. The number is honest and tiny. It cannot raise amplitude. It cannot set phase. The residue that listens to Mars is not propelled by Mars's faint glow. Plasma tricks get a turn. Call it a plasma sail, a charged sheet talking to the solar wind or flirting with the tenuous plasma around Mars. But Mars lacks a strong magnetic coat. Forces scale with things we do not see changing the right way. Frequencies do not line up. The noon radio hush cares about alignment, not charge. Perhaps not one sail, but a flock of thin shards. Debris could average polarization and glints while keeping area over mass high. The light curve of such a cloud should chatter. Radio cross-section should wander as orientations change. Measurements are boring. The sky refuses the messy fingerprints a debris swarm would stamp. Midway, I write it on the board to keep my hands honest. If it is a sail, it listens to the wrong star. The geometry that sets the beat is Sun, Mars, visitor. A true sail obeys the sun alone. Our rhythm does not toggle with distance squared to the star. It swells with the wedge Mars makes. We test whether the residual scales with drift in solar distance. It refuses. The slope ignores that drift and swells with phase angle to Mars. When Mars slides behind the traveler, a sail model would quiet. Our lean grows in this posture, as if the wedge kept time. I pivot back to smell. A sail chats in specular flashes, in polarization rises, in torque scars on light curves. A sail tied to sunlight shouts when phase to the sun changes and quiets when planets slide by. We see the opposite. Patience when the sun's cue shifts, insistence when Mars turns the key. The wrong orchestra holds the baton. The red team takes the chalk. They vary reflectivity, thickness and shape. They inject roughness and crinkles. They let panels wobble. They tune mass until numbers pout. Each time glints want to peep, polarization wants to rise, or amplitude collapses. Each time the phase tries to answer the sun, not Mars. A last rescue hides in a fold, a sail that broke and shadowed itself, somehow locking attitude to Mars. But to lock attitude to a passing planet with no magnetic hand and no air is to demand a puppet string we cannot name. The forces we own will not serve. The words sound clever, the math starves. I gather sail papers into one stack and press them flat. To save this story, I must invent parameters at the edge of credibility and pray they align by luck in 3 independent datasets. I will not call luck a mechanism. The sail does not die in poetry. It dies in budgets and signatures unsent. The room grows gentle, screens idle, plots cool. My pencil is loud now. I cross out a single word, sail, and leave the smear. I want the smear to remind me I wanted a pretty answer. Pretty answers do not owe rent. The phase we measure does. If not a sail, then perhaps it is us. Next, we take the blade to our process and to the places where people hide their favorite errors. We turn inward and test the human part of the machine. I make a new promise and sharpen the blade toward myself. Prove that I am wrong before I ask anyone to believe I am right. I open the notebook and list suspects. Confirmation bias, expectancy, post hoc stories dressed as plans, metadata leaks. Time labels, frames of reference, numerical precision, interpolation, caches that smear state between runs, outlier rules, audit gaps. First I police the mind. No hunting for significance after the fact. No rewriting of hypotheses after results. I pre-register an internal analysis, dull and strict, before I run a single line. I blind tags so that files look like strangers. I read the decision log and mark places where I sounded eager. I slow those hands. I add a reviewer who believes I am probably mistaken. Names and labels can whisper outcomes. I scrub file names until they are random strings. I remove telescope identifiers, band cues, and human hints. I pass timestamps to raw counts and then rebuild human time from scratch. I rerun the reductions with noise labels and shuffled orders. If a fake rhythm appears, the labeling is guilty. The plots stay steady. Reference frames invite quiet treason. I map positions as seen from the hill where our dome sits. Then I remap everything to the center of mass of the solar system. I state times as coordinated universal time, then as terrestrial time, then as barycentric dynamical time. I model light aberration and parallax. I search for a unit swapped in a sleepy moment. Differences show up as they should. Small, polite, and not locked to Mars. Precision is a place where computers mutter. I rebuild in 32-bit floats and then in 64. I turn fused, multiply, add on, and then off. I swap compilers and fix their optimization flags. I run on one processor family and then on another, and then on a borrowed graphics processor. Amplitude wanders a little. Phase does not move. The beat keeps time with geometry, not with computing fashion. Interpolation can counterfeit certainty. I cut the step size of the integrator in half, then in half again. I replace linear interpolation with cubic and with Hermite, and then with a coarser method to see if aliasing laughs at me. I slide the fit window across the night. The leftover keeps its phase like a monk keeping a vow. State leaks are sly. I ban caches. I delete every artifact between runs. I pin random seeds. I freeze the entire environment inside a container and repeat from a cold start. I audit that start and prove it is cold. The plots land on top of each other. If contamination exists, it hides better than my paranoia. Rules for outliers tempt vanity. I loosen sigma clipping until the sky grows loud. I tighten it until I am ashamed. I run jackknife tests that leave one station at a time. I pull one night, then another. I drop edge frames, then keep only edge frames. The rhythm tied to geometry does not blink. Human hands matter. I read every shift log. I find the night a technician rounded a time to the nearest second to satisfy a report template, and I carry that round through the maths. The effect exists and dies. I check daylight saving time and time zone drift. I trace the path from photon to plot and look for a hidden step that tries to help. There is no helper in the chain. The chain is boring by design, and boredom survives every cut I take. The ghost refuses to live here anymore. Midway, I aim the accusation at my own chest. If this is our error, why does it only speak when the geometry with Mars changes? A human mistake is not clever enough to check the sky's trigonometry. It does not wait for an angle to turn like a key before it rings the bell. I take a harsher cure. I write a minimal pipeline in another language with another set of libraries, new centroid rules, another astrometric solver, different weighting of frames, no comfort code, only what is required to walk from pixel to position. I send it to a colleague who owes me nothing and ask for review as if the code were an enemy. We sign our names to the plan and run the thing in a pinned container. The lean returns. It arrives with the same phase, the same patience, the same refusal to be heat. The amplitude agrees within errors that we published before we cared about drama. I copy the fresh plot to the older plot and blink them like a flipbook. Geometry nods like a conductor keeping time. My stomach drops and then steadies. I write a line at the bottom of the page. Reproduce or retract. We have reproduced. I close the audit. If this is our fault, I cannot yet name the mechanism that repeats only when Mars turns the key. That is not exoneration, only exhaustion. The next step is to look outside the room for the places where people speak in cautious emails, and where procedures are written in ink that someone later blacks out. If the truth hides under black rectangles, we will drag it into light. I open a new folder and give it a simple title. Then I breathe and I reach for the Public Records Request forms. I file broad and narrow Freedom of Information Act requests, dissect headers and redactions, and find timed gaps that align with the Sun-Mars visitor angle. The paper trail does not erase the drift. It points to a window I can test on a mountain. I announce scope before I send keywords, dates, senders, recipients, technical email, coordination memos, operations logs. I promise to publish null results with the same gravity as noise. I add the line that keeps me honest, count the paper like we count the sky. Then I submit and practice patience. Strategy matters. I split the request into 3 bundles: technical mail with attachments and plots, memos about priorities, allocations, contingency plans, instrument and server logs. I bias the calendar toward the days around the bend near Mars. I ask for machine-readable files when possible and clean scans when not. Law answers in measured steps. The agency acknowledges. Council cites exemptions: 5 for deliberative process, 6 for personal privacy, 7E for techniques and procedures. I appeal scope limits without heat. I lift the box onto the table and cut lines. The first wave is a riot of formats: mailbox archives, scanned pages, calendar exports. Many pages are blacked out with a zeal that feels like habit more than malice. I build a spreadsheet: date, sender, recipient, subject, size, percent, redacted. I read what remains before I interpret what is gone. A thread shows stations arranging a blind cross-check for geometry. Another notes a narrow window and a possible occultation. A draft agenda asks who can spare a southern array for backup. In several places, ink goes dark where decisions live. Redaction covers. Edges still leak meaning. Black is not silence. Black has shape. I measure rectangles as if they were features on a sky map. I tag where the black falls in the sentence. Names, numbers, choices, patterns repeat. The same block length hides in multiple places at similar hours. Headers do not know how to lie gracefully. I pass the chain of received stamps to rebuild relay paths and clock trails. I compare the date field to the message ID time encoding and look for skew. Time zone offsets betray machines that sleep late. Server stamps show when messages truly landed. X mailer lists software versions. In reply to builds a conversation tree. When topics jump, I mark the minute and slide it onto the geometry timeline. A pattern clicks. 10 to 15-minute gaps appear on 3 critical days, each when the phase angle is at its hardest numbers. Midway, I write it in my notebook so I cannot retreat later. The black ink has edges. Edges mean shape. I underline it twice. The mantra is not poetry. It is permission to treat erasure like a contour line. Chain of custody matters, so I trace the paper itself. Version numbers on memos rise in the hours around the curve. A version 1.0 and a version 1.1 bracket a change in the Sun-Mars visitor angle. A note shows who downloaded which draft and when. The names are not the point. The timing is. Calendars breathe the same rhythm. A quick sync meeting lands just before the angle peaks. The minutes are trimmed into vagueness. One line survives with teeth: allocate backup time, south array. Headers yield one more oddity. A draft occultation note was sent, then recalled. The header remains, the body is black. The recall arrived 7 minutes after the peak angle on the second critical day. It is a ghost with a timestamp, and timestamps have standing. Outside evidence adds texture, even if it never rises to proof. Another observatory's dashboard shows maintenance near noon on one of our days. A field engineer writes, without naming the subject, that the midday run felt strangely quiet. I do not cite it formally. I let it sit like a smudge that might point the eye. I check myself for wishful glue. I redo the alignment using only timestamps, ignoring words. I swap the human time zone for the system time zone. I test offsets that could come from daylight saving shifts or mail server drift. The coincidence survives. I fall back to the simplest thing. Time versus angle. The teeth still line up. I return to the words, humbler. The legal notes teach caution. Exemptions can be honest even when the ink stares. Deliberative process hides arguments. Personal privacy hides phone numbers. Techniques and procedures may hide theatre or craft. I write those sentences so I do not become my own preacher. Then I file a narrower search focused on the 3 windows the ink drew. The second release is leaner and sharper. The header analysis repeats. The same 10-minute pauses bracket the same angles, now with more mailboxes in the sample. A calendar correction appears for a southern array that did in fact switch to a flexible mode on one of the days. An operations log snippet refers to standing by for geometry. The phrase survives because it is banal. I organize the evidence for a court that cares only about clocks. Timeline on top. Phase angle beneath. Received times beneath that. A 4th row for version ticks. The figure is ugly and fair. It points. It does not shout. It aligns with the sky. That is enough for me today. Conclusion, preliminary and plain. The documents do not erase the anomaly. They shape a test window. They indicate that others considered a Mars edge event and a southern array held in reserve. They show that words moved when angles reached their hardest numbers. That is not a scandal. That is a map. I pin the map above my desk. I return to humility one more time. Paper is not sky. Metadata is not a measurement. But when both wear the same rhythm, the case for an outdoor verdict grows. The next act is not another memo. It is a night and a day under a dome with frost on the stairs and fans like wind. It is Mauna Kea. I touch the line that reads, allocate backup time, south array. If paper asks the sky to speak, the sky must get a voice. We pack spare clocks and spare cables. We print the pre-registered plan twice and leave one copy sealed. We book a window where Mars will carve the edge we need. The mountain will decide whether geometry is king or I am a clerk who draws shapes on ink and calls it data. Tonight, I will be a clerk who climbs. The next beat belongs to the summit. On Mauna Kea, we stage a synchronized Mars limb occultation and a multiband radio watch, lock the clocks, and wait for geometry to speak. Thin air in the dome tastes like cold metal. We climb the last stairs with small breaths and big cases. Roles are read out. Optics lead, radio lead, timekeeper, safety. I unlock the instrument cabinet and lay tools out like silver. The night crew watches the horizon hardening into a line. I start the duty log with the simplest oath I own. We will measure. We will not improvise. The mountain nods in its wind. Clocks first, pulses per second, and network time protocol exist, but they are only backups tonight. The portable atomic clock hums on a cart like a tame animal. We feed its pulse along coax to the camera and to the radio recorder. We count cables by hand. We mark delay, connector by connector, round trip, one path for light, one path for radio. The error bar is small and welcome. I draw a box around it and write, done. Optics next. We choose a star with a clean profile and a brightness our sensor likes. The field is simple. The guiding star's steady. We set high frame rates and short exposures. Read noise barely blinks. The script is carved. Pre, ingress, limb, egress. We mount a small accelerometer on the telescope to catch any tremor. The focus breathes once, then locks. I type the fallback plan in plain words in case adrenaline makes me stupid later. Radio lines up its own site. We lock the L band and the S band. We run a scan across both to draw the band pass clean. A noise source lights the chain, then winks off. Gains sit where they belong. The system temperature stays calm. We angle the feed. We secure the downlink to the south array on an encrypted channel. The reply is a short tone and a shorter text. Standing by. Geometry is the metronome. We pin the predicted position of Mars and the traveler into a single plot. We mark the phase angle window in a band of pale ink. If a signature belongs to shape, it will sing inside that band. I read the countdown time. The team signs the printout, one after another, like a pre-flight page. The ritual is not for theatre. It is to slow our hands. Midway, I write our hinge line on the whiteboard. If the clocks hold, the sky will speak. The words look plain. They feel like brass. We say them once together. Then the room goes quiet except for fans. I hear my own pulse and let it slow to match seconds. We take pre-flight data without touching science. Photometry on nearby stars sets the point spread function and the full width at half maximum. Wind and temperature sit where we expect. The radio chain records a 0 run with the dish held an arc minute off target. No local interference rises above the floor. I save these tests to a folder labeled Proof We Prepared. Before the window opens, the timekeeper runs one last gauntlet. We inject a 1 Hz pulse into the camera and read the stamp the frame writes. We repeat on the radio side and compare rising edges. Offsets match notes. I mirror recordings onto a cold drive and seal the case. We compute hashes and write them in ink on a card. The card slides under a magnet by the console. If the sky argues, the paper trail will testify without nerves. The south array checks in again. Flexible mode engaged, ready to swing bands on the call. We rehearse the code phrase for the entrance into the window. We rehearse the phrase for abort if clouds roll. The forecast is thin but honest. Our horizon to the west looks clean. The east holds a smear I do not like. We accept the risk because clocks do not bargain. Final minutes arrive like a slow wave. The occultation star is pinned, guiding smooths into a line. The radio recorder starts its long file. I read the countdown out loud. 3 minutes, 2, 1. Voices vanish. Keys stop clicking. There is only breath and the small tick of relays. A small warning kicks. The secondary mirror shivers 1 arc second and then resettles. A fan spins hard on a power supply and dials down. The control screen flashes yellow and returns to green. The thermal supervisor speaks in a low voice, stable. No one turns from the clocks. Discipline holds. Scripts hold. I feel the tremor leave my jaw. Mars crawls. The predicted limb touches our line. The chart's bold slash meets the time bar I taped in place. I draw 1 deep breath, let it settle, and press the mark key for both instruments. Frames pour. The star brightens, steadies, then waits for the knife edge. In my headset, the radio clock ticks like rain. The mountain hisses like a radio that will not quite tune. The edge is a thought becoming a measurement. I press transmit on the small mic and keep my voice level. Hold the noon bands. The edge is here. The south array answers with a single tone that feels like a hand on my shoulder. Data thickens the screens into new color. The rest of the night waits behind this beat. We listen. I open the noon window and listen on purpose. L band first, then S band. The dynamic spectrum blooms like a waterfall of time. Before we touch the target, we take baseline. The bandpass looks even. The system temperature holds steady. Hear the room before you hear the sky. We pin the settings: time resolution, frequency resolution, integration length, polarization mode. Then we freeze them. The south array mirrors our stance. We kill the calibration noise and archive a last pre-window slice. Now we hunt for radio frequency interference. A kurtosis check walks the bands for the sharp teeth of machines. We map side lobes. We blacklist dirty channels and mark them on the display. The water stays clean. No growl follows the clock of the sun. The hill keeps its secrets. The window opens. In the clean band a hollow deepens. The power drops with a boundary. Not a knife cut. Not a narrow thorn from a local transmitter. A trench with slopes you can follow. The trench moves with time in the direction Mars dictates. We move to absolute time. I align stamps to the barycentric dynamical frame and repay the delay the photons owe. Then I overplot the predicted geometry. The hollow lives inside the phase window we printed. I cross-correlate our stream with the southern stream and slide the curves until they nod. The peak lands at the delay air and cable should cause. The graphs meet like hands. The quiet has edges. I say it out loud so the words leave a mark. The hush is not smooth. The floor falls, holds, then climbs with a slope. It respects the border of a shape. It is not absences spread at random. It is a gap with a rim. Edges mean physics. We test the ionosphere and the wind from the star. Total electron content is low. The planetary index reads ordinary. The solar wind is a rumor. No storm, no traveling absorption, no heavy hand on all radios at once. We push the beam off target by a notch. The hollow vanishes. We return to on target, and it returns like a voice that only speaks from one seat. If side lobes were the culprit, the rhythm would smear when we nod. It does not. The beat remains tied to the main lobe and to that line in the sky. I call for full polarization. Stokes. I drops, Q, U, and V do not conspire to fake a trick. There is no Faraday rotation that can carry the shape we see, no sudden change of handedness, no signature that screams interference, only a fall in total power that tracks the geometry on the board. The spectrum gives us a portrait. The trench leans in time the way a planet limb leans across a sightline. It is broader than a man-made line. It is narrower than a global ionospheric bruise. It rises and falls in a curve I could sketch with my wrist. The slope matches the wedge we calculated in the morning. The south array replies with its own painting. Their hollow appears at the same geometry and within our expected offset. Different clocks, different air. The phase aligns. Our timekeeper circles the checkboxes on the plan. Independent confirmation lives in ink now. We quantify before we feel too much. Depth in decibels, width in seconds, significance against the pre-registered threshold. We run a blind detector on random windows outside the phase band. Nothing rises past noise. We run it inside the phase band on nights with no geometry and the trench refuses to appear. We stack the two stations and the hollow deepens as it should. The numbers are not large, they are enough. Heat has no vote here. Temperature logs walk past the trench without touching it. Currents do not flinch with its steps. Noon does not drive the rhythm. Angle drives the rhythm. The silence keeps the schedule our triangle drew. It begins after the mark. It ends before the window closes. It is a citizen of geometry alone. We test ugly possibilities again because pride is cheap. We blow a fan across a preamp and record the hiccup. It does not mimic the trench. We nudge a cable to coax a contact click. The spectrum spikes and heals. It does not carve a hollow. We step a reference by a sliver. The waterfall shows a straight slant, not our curve. The instrument will lie if you wound it. It will not lie in this accent. I pace once and force my shoulders to drop. Numbers cannot celebrate. People can. We do not. We print two plots and tape them side by side. The left is time versus frequency with the trench boxed in red pencil. The right is phase angle with our window clean. The edges line up like ties on a rail. I open the log and write the sentence we planned. Noon silence with structure confirmed at two stations, synchronized to Mars geometry, above pre-registered thresholds. I add the caveat the red team demanded. Local interference remains unlikely but not impossible. Then I sign my name smaller than I meant to and slide the book aside. We fall into a hush that is not scientific. It is the silence of a room that knows a thing and is deciding what to do. I look at the optical console and the star that will meet the planet's edge. Radio has drawn the trench. Optics must draw the knife. If the hush is a rim, the light should show a bite. The path from thought to test is short now. I breathe and speak on the channel that binds hill to south. Hold configuration. Keep bands in record. The window for light is opening. From the far array, a voice answers in one syllable. Ready. I close my eyes and see the limb glide. The next act belongs to starlight and a blade. Next we test the shadow. I set the frame. Star, Mars, my line of sight. The mount hums like a throat before a vow. Geometry has come to a hard edge. We agreed on the rule before the window opened. Radio drew the trench. Light must now draw the knife. I watch the star hold steady in the guider and write the last time check. Milliseconds, not poetry. We run differential photometry against a comparison star. Apertures hug the point spread function with a narrow annulus for sky. Exposures are short. Tracking sits in a quiet lock. The log breathes 3 words: before, during, after. Prediction first, the kind without romance. A clean edge gives a step softened by Fresnel, by aperture, by the time we integrate. The step is not a cliff, it is a curb. No dip before the knife. No flutter that repeats with any planet's posture. If optics and atmosphere behave, the curve will be polite, and then gone. Scintillation at millisecond scales will jitter brightness without respect for geometry. Guiding will wiggle the core. The instrument will mutter in dark current. Those voices are random, they do not march. They offer texture, not structure. The third path keeps me awake, a shallow pre-ingress depression, broad enough to refuse a glitch, timed to the Sun-Mars visitor wedge. Call it an odd penumbra. In this story, the light yields before the edge, then surrenders, then returns with a twin on egress. If the noon radio trench was a rim, this would be the matching valley in starlight. Time is a co-author. We translate stamps to the barycentric frame and pay the flight time debt. We sync to the radio clock and to the portable atom on the cart. We normalize flux to the comparison star so the atmosphere's tantrums cancel. All parameters go cold. No knobs after this line. Fresnel will try to whisper, but this telescope and cadence will blur it into civility. The Fresnel scale at Mars distance is tens of meters. Our aperture washes that into a step with grace, not teeth. Mars's thin air can bend a thread of light along the limb and draw a faint aureole after contact, not before. Earth's turbulence will bother us, and our differencing will tame it. The signatures split cleanly. A persistent pre-dip belongs to geometry we did not order. A plain step belongs to the clean edge. Ingress arrives like a careful surgeon. I call the time. The flux slides down a planned slope, smooth and sure. The star shrinks by integers. I can count, then pauses. The light hesitates before the knife. We hold still and let seconds pass. The comparison star stays upright and dull. Control frames outside the window show no bruise. The guide graph does not cough. The accelerometer reads calm. The pre-dip survives a handful of frames and keeps a shape my textbooks forgot to include. I circle the region on the plot with a fingertip. I try to keep steady. Egress is a mirror we interrogate. When the star comes back from behind the limb, a twin of the valley appears, smaller, as if the knife dulled in leaving. The timing sits where the geometry book promised. We write the stamps next to the notches like names on a roster. We stack the optical timeline under the radio's noon sequence. We align both in barycentric time and subtract the predicted path length. The dip lives inside the trench, offset by the delay our positions demand. Cross-correlation peaks where the plan said it should. 2 instruments, 1 rhythm. Pre-registration keeps us from praising ourselves too loudly. We test measured depth and width against thresholds we posted before. The pre-dip clears them with room to spare. The egress echo limps across but lives. Blind windows outside the geometry band stay quiet. A second optical station, less lucky with seeing, still shows the pause in a fainter copy. We remove easy alibis. The comparison star shows no matching scar. The steps curve matches the blurred Fresnel prediction once contact begins, which argues the instrument did its part. Atmospheric logs show no burst of fast seeing. The accelerometer saw no kick. Guiding never left its lane. We are left with the shape itself, tied to where Mars placed its rim. The limb is a teacher that does not raise its voice. I lay 3 curves on the same axes. The clean step, the noisy baseline, the odd penumbra. Our points kiss the third, not an embrace, a brush. I do not celebrate. I do not surrender caution. I speak the sentence the red team made me practice. Update the priors. The words trigger the next script. Save every frame twice. Write hashes to a card. Place a copy in the cold box. Call the south array and pin their stamps beside ours. Note the delta to the radio trench, not because we trust it, but because it rhymes. Hand the chalk to the statistician with the least patience for wonder. Ask the optics lead to run the reduction with a different code base. The night is not over. The math has woken. I stand because I need to feel the floor. The mountain has its own pulse. We fit the 2 valleys and the 2 steps and pull uncertainties like threads. I let the numbers fall. They land in the box labeled unlikely under the null. They are not proof. They are gravity nudging belief a few degrees at a time. The room murmurs low. A printer wakes and draws a figure the size of my hand. Someone tapes it to the cabinet above the spare cables. It looks like a door left slightly ajar. I do not touch it. I pull a chair to the whiteboard and write the new odds in pencil. Then I turn the board toward the others and toward myself. We did not ask for a valley before the knife. The sky gave one anyway, where geometry said to look and where radio had already hummed. That is enough to move from hope to reckoning. In the morning I will say that light followed the same strange map as sound. Tonight I keep my voice for the math. I look at the plan for the next hour. It begins with a table, not a speech, priors, likelihoods, evidence, and the quiet order from the beginning sits beneath it all. Count, then speak. We are ready to count again, in a room that admits how much it does not know. We will be careful. We lift the chalk together and let Bayes into the war room. I wheel the whiteboard into the center of the room and draw 3 columns. At the top I write H0, H1 and H2. Radio on the left, optical in the middle, decisions on the right. The rule is the old one taped to the mountain console. Count first, speak later. The red team faces me. The atomic clock hangs on the wall. Our pre-registered plan lies open with dates, thresholds and signatures. We define the models in plain words. H0 is instrument or atmosphere, a basket of nuisances that can mimic structure without respecting geometry. H1 is the clean knife, a Fresnel softened step with no hesitation before contact and no echo after. H2 is the odd penumbra, a shallow valley before ingress and a twin on egress, phase locked to the Sun, Mars, visitor angle, aligned to the noon radio trench. Shared parameters are delta T for delay, a depth parameter, and a width parameter. Priors come from the plan we filed before we saw a frame. They lean cautious. H0 carries most weight because ordinary failure is common. H1 is neutral. H2 is penalized for complexity. The document lists wide but finite ranges for delta T, for depth and for width based on the devices we used and the cadences we ran. We do not alter those ranges now that a story is tempting us. We write the likelihoods next. For optical data, differential photometry pushes noise toward a well-behaved bell curve in flux. For radio data, power behaves closer to a log-normal family. We include cross-station timing uncertainty by letting delta T vary inside limits set by the atomic clock and by barycentric dynamical timestamps. The red team checks each term and circles places where a shortcut could hide. We remove shortcuts. Marginal likelihood is the price of admission. We integrate the likelihood over delta T, over depth, and over width weighted by their priors. The result is not a best fit point. It is a score that punishes models that only work inside a narrow sliver of their own space. We name the quiet punishment and accept it. The Occam penalty. Fit and frugality share a table and refuse to leave. We use Bayes factors to compare the scores. We compute the ratio of H2 to H1 and the ratio of H2 to H0. We interpret results on the Jeffreys scale, where small numbers are whispers, mid-numbers are conversation, and large numbers are pressure. We do not splash decimals. We use thresholds registered in the plan: weak, moderate, strong. We feed the 2 instruments into one engine. The noon trench in radio and the pre-dip with a faint echo in light both raise the H2 score. The ratio of H2 to H0 clears the moderate threshold and pushes towards strong. The ratio of H2 to H1 is above 1 even after the complexity penalty. Timing checks hold. The clocks earn their keep. Midway, I write a sentence across the top line so I cannot dodge it. The null cannot pay the rent. I do not sing while I write it. I say it as if a judge asked me to repeat it. The room stays quiet, the way rooms are when belief moves by clicks rather than leaps. A breath, a nod. Back to the board. We kick the tires on our courage. We widen the priors until they feel absurd. We tighten them until they feel smug. We swap hyperpriors for depth and for width. The posterior for H2 stays high over reasonable territory. H0 only wins when the priors pretend the instruments are far worse than they are, or when we forbid delays the clocks already allow. That is not an honest world, and we cross it out. We check predictions born after the fit. For each model, we draw synthetic runs with the same cadence and noise we measured. H0 spits noise that wanders with no respect for geometry. H1 gives a smooth step with no pre-dip and no echo. H2 repeats the valley and its faint twin in the right places. The visual is not proof. It is rehearsal for the next sky. We write posterior odds as numbers a non-expert can read. Prior odds times Bayes factor equals posterior odds. H2 does not crush its rivals. It does not need to. It passes the bar for a careful provisional claim and for funding a repetition. The red team signs a short statement. We consent to release the intermediate result with all code and with plots that show priors beside posteriors and assumptions beside outcomes. Integrity is a verb. We lock the data and publish checksums. We push a container that can rerun every figure on a clean machine. We schedule a repeat during the next usable Mars window. We prepare a question and answer sheet that refuses speculation. We draft a dry summary for colleagues who will try to break what we think we have and to do it in public. I pick up the marker and write the words we will send in the morning. Posterior with priors and code to the community at 9. I cap the marker. My phone buzzes. An anonymous account posts a plot that looks like our pre-registration figure, with the trench and the pre-dip highlighted. The colors are ours, the fonts are ours, the header is not. The red team looks at me. The door of the war room swings on slow hinges. We count before we speak. Someone plans to speak for us. I feel heat rise, then fall. I silence the phone. Then I say the sentence. We have a leak. The room breathes once. We begin a new plan in pencil, not to hide, but to make sure the numbers, not the noise, decide what happens next now. Phones light up. A plot from our lab appears on an anonymous forum. The colors and the fonts are ours. The title is not. My stomach tightens and then steadies. I say the rule that survives every storm. Count first, speak later. We will not be pushed by a screenshot. We will be led by measured numbers and by a clean chain of custody. I open a notebook, date the page and begin a list of actions that start with the word verify. We verify before we react. I compare cryptographic checksums against our internal vault. I search the file for a digital watermark. I read image metadata for creation time, editing trail, and device clues. I compare axes, units, tick marks, and captions. The curve matches our reduction, frame by frame. The header does not. Someone cropped the pre-registered banner and pasted a headline that suggests a finished discovery we have not claimed. Law, communication, and ethics form a hard triangle on my desk. I call legal counsel to record the event and to preserve evidence. I call the communications lead to centralize replies and to assign a single voice. I call the red team and repeat the only order that matters. Keep testing. Keep trying to break the case and do not argue in public. Integrity outranks the hunt for a leaker. Curiosity outranks outrage. We check for manipulation with the same cold care we bring to Sky. We test gamma curves and decompression artifacts. We search for clone tool scars and for stretched axes. We compare font ratios to our template and look for color shifts inside lines. We find a careful crop that removes context and a caption that overstates certainty. The plot is ours, the headline is not. I write that sentence twice and underline the not. Pressure arrives in waves, email piles up, reporters call. Social accounts declare that a small valley before the knife proves an engineered object. A legislator asks for a briefing. I write one sentence on a card and tape it above the console. The data speaks in numbers, not in slogans. It is for me as much as for them. I read it again until my voice is even. We take a public stance that fits our plan and our conscience. We will release with code and with cryptographic checksums, not with a blurry capture. We will include dates, priors, and thresholds, and we will not claim victory. We will show our uncertainty beside our result. The team signs that sentence with quiet faces and steady hands. Our rule for talking is the same as for measuring. Leave a trail that can be checked. We protect people before we protect pride. We move discussions to official channels and disable forwarding outside the group. We rotate shifts so no one burns out. We remind everyone to use two-factor authentication and to separate personal accounts from work accounts. We set a private hotline for harassment or fear. A lab is a human thing. Human things need care when the spotlight swings too hot. Two paths sit on the table. The first is a controlled minimal release, exactly what we planned, only sooner. A reproducible package with code, with data fingerprints, with pre-registered thresholds, and with plots that place priors beside posteriors. The second is a short pause while we run additional checks. The choice turns on two risks. misunderstanding, and the chance that others cannot reproduce today, we decide. We will publish the minimal release and schedule new controls. We will include every cryptographic checksum and every provenance record. We will publish the pre-registered plan and the container that rebuilds the figures end to end. We will also announce null experiments designed to turn absence into evidence. Windows without the Mars geometry, false frequency bands, off-target pointings, and a beam nod pattern meant to destroy any phase-locked trench. We draft the message, short, sober, and complete. We give context and method. We report our current level of confidence in plain words and in a small table. We describe the plan to repeat and to invite replication. We ban the words discovery, proof, and alien. The final sentence is the one I practice aloud. This is an intermediate data release that can be reproduced. By evening, the first stories echo our language, not the anonymous headline. That is progress, not victory. We post the repository link, the reproducibility container, and the checksums. We ask colleagues to rebuild the figures and to tell us in public where they fail. We still must repair the hole without tearing the project. We trace the leak with tools that do not poison science. We compare document fingerprints. We count dead pixels inside repeating screenshots. We look at layer ordering inside vector files. We do not name suspects outside a locked room. The goal is to fix a process, not to humiliate a person. The repair will be documented like any measurement. We return to the lab and set up the controls that will let the null speak. Control window without geometry, false band test, off-target run, beam nod, blind detector on random windows. Cross-station correlation set to fail when it should. If the trench and the pre-dip vanish outside the window, absence will earn a voice. I write a last line where everyone can see it. Make the null scream. I publish the null control schedule and tape it to the console. Nights and hours when the Sun, Mars, and the visitor do not make the wedge. Same instruments, same clocks, same scripts. If the noon radio trench and the optical pre-dip are real, they must not appear outside the geometry window. Absence, measured, will speak louder than headlines. We will count silence the way we counted edges. We freeze every parameter that is not geometry. Frame rates stay the same. Apertures stay the same. Radio bands and time and frequency resolution stay the same. Polarization mode stays the same. The chain from the portable atomic clock to the camera and to the radio recorder stays the same. We change only where and when we point. If a ghost survives, it belongs to us, not to the sky. First comes the off-geometry window. We observe with both Hill and South array when the Sun, Mars, and the visitor make a dull angle far from the threshold. We align timestamps in the barycentric dynamical frame and repay photon travel time. We run the same cross-correlation between stations. No peak rises, no trench appears. The waterfall looks like water. Next, we push the beam off target. We slide the radio lobe a few arc minutes from the predicted path and record the pass. The spectrum is smooth and stays that way. We swing back on target while the phase is still wrong. The plot stays flat. If side lobes were guilty, they would be showy now. They are not. The sky looks like a sky without geometry. We test guard bands, the pretend frequencies next door to the real ones. We shift the filters to a clean slice that holds no celestial emission and run the dynamic spectrum. We point at the same place in the same bad geometry. The blind detector walks the band and finds no trench. That rules out a fixed system quirk that paints hollows no matter where we listen. We rotate polarization to chase a false Faraday whisper. We alternate linear and circular feeds and measure the Stokes parameters, I, Q, U, and V, while the beam holds steady. Total power stays flat and refuses to nod in any component. No rotation can summon the shape the right angle once did. The instrument is not a ventriloquist. It cannot throw a voice into a mute scene. We scramble time to break the phase on purpose. We randomize timestamps within small safe bounds and reverse frame order in a separate run. We turn the cross-correlation off so the code cannot peak at station-to-station delays. Any pattern that survives these crimes would be our sin. Everything interesting dies. The trench and the dip do not reappear. Rhythm belonged to geometry, and geometry is absent here. We log the air and the space around us so a storm cannot steal credit. Temperature, wind, and pressure move in their habitual ranges. The total electron content above both stations reads ordinary. Geomagnetic indices are unremarkable. The solar wind mumbles along in its usual voice. There is no weather in the ionosphere or in the room to explain a missing song. The null is quiet for plain reasons. Optics get a control of their own. We run differential photometry on a comparison star on a night with no Mars limb in play. The light curve is flat within measured noise. There is no shallow pre-dip and no faint echo on return. The point spread function and the full width at half maximum live where they should. The Geiger graph is boring, which is its job. Midway, I write a cold sentence on the board and box it in red. When geometry is mute, the data is mute. We repeat the line into our headsets the way pilots read a checklist. It is not poetry. It is a promise to treat absence as a result, not as a pause. We let that promise govern our next calculations and our next words. Absence still needs numbers. We compute upper limits on how deep and how wide a trench or a valley could be without our detectors noticing. We fold those limits into the same integrals used in the war room. In the null regime, the Bayes factor leans against the odd penumbra model because that model predicts a shape we do not see. Combined with the geometry runs, the same math raises the specificity of the signature. We update the posteriors with the red team watching. In control nights, the instrument and atmosphere model fits. The clean knife model makes the expected polite step when a limb appears, and the odd penumbra model produces nothing. The blind detector on random windows reports a false positive rate near 0. I write that number down. We will need it. We gather the plots on one wall. Off geometry runs, flat. Off target runs, flat. Guard band runs, flat. Polarization games, flat. Timestamp shuffles, flat. Environment logs, quiet. Optical controls, flat. Each panel carries the same caption, same instruments, same clocks, wrong angle. Each panel wears a hash and a date. Anyone can rebuild them. That is the point. The result fits in one line that feels small and right. When there is no geometry, there is no signal. The null screams by refusing to sing. Numbers now certify that refusal. The story becomes less fragile because empty nights do the heavy lifting that dramatic nights cannot. The red team signs a second note, controls passed. We pivot to what comes next. One mountain is not a world, and two stations are not a network. The signature must travel. We invite observatories north and south with the same reproducible package we already released. We pick 3 independent windows from different latitudes. We ask them to pin clocks, share raw files, and publish failures. The email ends with 4 words that make my throat dry and my hands steady. The world, please test. Global repetition will test scope and strain comfort under different skies. I send the call to replicate with our full package attached. Source code, a reproducible software container, cryptographic checksums, and the pre-registered plan travel together as one bundle. We announce 3 observing windows placed across the planet, one in the southern hemisphere, one in the high desert along the western coast of South America, and one on an island to the east. Time zones are staggered so the Sun, Mars, and the visitor draw their wedge under different skies. The message is plain: repeat us, improve us, and contradict us if you can. Each station pins its clocks before speaking to the sky. A global navigation satellite system feed steadies a rubidium clock or a hydrogen maser clock. A 1 pulse per second signal walks through the camera and through the radio recorder. Timestamps move from coordinated universal time to barycentric dynamical time so that the solar system, not the hill, holds the pen. Before any shutter opens, each team publishes cryptographic checksums for the raw file manifest and for the chain of custody logs. Reproduction must also mean independence. Every pipeline runs inside a pinned software container with versions fixed and random seeds written down. Teams may write their own algorithms so long as they pre-register thresholds, parameters, and stopping rules. No private libraries, no silent patches. Every step must invite audit. We are not recruiting allies for a headline. We are building a court where the only witnesses that matter are clocks, plots, and the sky itself. Station A in southern Africa reports first. The night is steady. The letter L band and the letter S band both show a faint but repeatable radio trench within the geometry window. High-speed optical photometry records a shallow pre-ingress valley with the same patients we met on the mountain. The time standards match our table. An off-window run on the next night lands flat. The station lead writes 3 words that let my hands relax. Geometry decides again. Station B in Chile follows. Dry air and calm seeing make glass a better listener. The pre-ingress valley and its faint echo on egress stand clearer than in our first pass. Radio confirms the trench within errors. When we cross-correlate Station A with Station B, the peak lands at a delay that fits air, wire, and the turn of the earth beneath us. The figure is dull and decisive. I thank dullness in my notes so I will not forget its worth. Station C begins under clouds. It lives on an island to the east, and the sea throws weather against the dome. The optical chain dozes, but the radio chain stays awake. Inside the geometry window, a shallow trench appears with the right timing and fades when Mars moves on. The null night that follows is quiet. The guard band exercise stays clean. The beam nod never summons a fake rhythm. We lay every timestamp on the same barycentric line and subtract the delays demanded by light and wire. We let each pair of stations slide past one another and then lock at the point where the overlap sings the strongest. Peaks appear at every baseline inside error bars fixed before any data moved. Local time has no vote. Geometry alone keeps the beat. It is a sentence we have earned the right to say aloud. Midway, I write a line where everyone can read it. Different skies, the same rhythm. The hemispheres disagree about weather, but agree about phase. The sentence is not triumph, it is posture. We are learning to stand on evidence as if it were ground, and to keep our voices level when comfort knocks at the door with pretty stories. Null controls travel with the campaign as a shadow that keeps us honest. Every site runs off target beams, guard band scans, deliberate beam nods, and alternating polarization. The blind detector that roams random windows outside geometry stays quiet across continents. The false positive rate hovers near 0 within limits set before the first shutter opened. The result is not dramatic. That is its virtue, and we salute it. Parallax peeks through in the optical timing. Ingress and egress differ by a few milliseconds between two sites, exactly the amount a simple model of baselines and angles forecast. The numbers carry us back to basics and prove that the conversion to barycentric dynamical time and the light travel corrections are doing what we told them to do. It is a small delight, a check that is boring and beautiful at the same time. Bayes waits with a ledger and a sensible voice. We combine evidence from all stations and fold in the Occam penalty again. The ratio of support for the odd penumbra model over the instrument or atmosphere model clears the strong threshold. The ratio over the clean knife model stands above 1, even though the odd penumbra model is more complex. Sensitivity to priors remains sane across changes any fair reviewer would call reasonable. Transparency walks beside us. Each station releases a minimal data package with a reproducible container that can rebuild figures without reaching back to us. We publish a common sheet of questions and answers and forbid the vocabulary of discovery. Outsiders may try to replicate or to refute, and we will answer in public with changes that are numbered, signed, and archived. Authority belongs to what anyone can run on an ordinary machine. I tape a world map above the console and press 3 pins into it. 2 pins earn circles. Radio trench and optical pre-dip both returned, and the null was clean. The 3rd pin wears a half circle because clouds harmed the light, but the radio trench still appeared. Next, we move from repeating the note to learning the melody. We will sweep the phase angle in deliberate steps and try to draw lines of equal silence around Mars. Draw the field, not the headline. The global network is ready to map the quiet. I swear to draw the field, not the headline. The quiet trench in radio and the valley in light must become a map, not a story. Around Mars there is a shape that follows geometry and ignores heat, a shape made instruments whisper. I turn that shape into contours you can point at. Mountain nights gave us notes. Now I want the melody. I want to see where the silence lives, where it fattens and where it thins into noise. I name the stage in coordinates. The phase angle between Sun, Mars and the visitor is the first axis. The impact parameter in Mars radii is the second. The position angle around the limb is the third. Range from Earth to Mars sets the Fresnel blur. The observing band controls radio response. Time is translated from coordinated universal time to barycentric dynamical time, so the solar system holds the clock. A grid of windows becomes our calendar. We tile the plane of phase angle and position angle with reachable slots, and we pick impact parameters that keep the star safely skimming the limb. We spread those slots across latitudes and across stations so weather and politics cannot veto the campaign. Between every two geometry windows we schedule a null. Every station runs the same scripts. Redundancy becomes design, not fear. We need numbers that carry shape, not mood. For radio I record depth and width of the quiet trench. For optics I record depth of the pre-ingress valley and a small echo after egress when it is present. Times are aligned in the barycentric frame and cross-station delays are corrected against the portable atomic clocks. Errors are measured and published beside the numbers rather than hidden in the text. I build a forward model that tells me what the sky would write on our sensors if a quiet field wrapped Mars. The kernel turns quiet strength at a given phase angle, position angle, and impact parameter into the radio trench and the optical valley we measure. It folds in Fresnel, softening for light, integration time per frame, the band pass of each radio chain, and the ways instruments smear an edge into a curb. Nothing glamorous, only causes that belong. Then I turn the arrows around and ask for the field from the data. I write a Bayesian inversion with a prior that favors smoothness on the sphere and distrusts embroidery. Call it a Gaussian process, overorder spherical harmonics. The likelihoods come from radio and from optics separately and then together. The Occam penalty lives inside the marginal likelihood so that a field that only fits when it wriggles does not win by stagecraft. I clean the instruments out of the map before I let anyone read it. I normalize optical point spread functions, station by station, and I collapse each radio band into a flat response the container can reproduce. I regularize with a Tikhonov weight and a smooth prior, then I test the choices by holding out whole windows. I jackknife by station and by band. I carry covariance between radio and optics as an object. On my screen, iso-quiet contours appear with an uncertainty map that refuses to flatter us. The first surprise lands gently. Different latitudes draw the same lobe of silence. The feature holds phase with the Sun, Mars, visitor triangle, but does not care whether a window opens at local noon or in the small hours. The line I write on the board is short and cold, different latitudes, shared lobe. The sky repeats itself where geometry repeats, not where weather repeats. It is the sort of sentence that frees and frightens at the same time. As the map gains data, the main lobe slides off the sub-Mars line. The maximum lives at a position angle rotated from the point closest to us. The impact parameter dependence is not symmetric either. That asymmetry refuses an origin in planetary shine or in a dusty ring. It suggests a geometry tied to the relative triangle rather than to any single body. I draw an arrow from that note to the null results, and I circle them as a pair. I lay the map against ordinary suspects and watch it misbehave in all the right ways. It does not scale like a ring of dust scattering light. It does not follow a plasma sheath that hugs Mars without paying attention to the solar angle. It does not mimic a side lobe pattern traced by drive mechanics. It does not breathe with one over range squared to the sun the way a sail would. The fingerprints are wrong for those tails. I try to break the map by changing my assumptions. I widen the smoothness prior, then I narrow it. I shift the harmonic cutoff. I rebalance station weights and pretend one site is twice as good as another. I run the inversion without certain nights. The iso-quiet contours move and then return like a buoy after a wave. The null map remains flat. I record the maximum deviation and compare it to the alarm threshold in writing. We stay below it. Forecasts are the honest way to bet your name. From the current field, I predict radio depth and width and optical dip and echo for 3 forthcoming windows, with phase angle, position angle, and impact parameter written on the schedule in ink. I print local nights and hours so the hill teams can sleep or suffer as needed. I pre-register the pass or fail thresholds for each measure so that relief and disappointment do not get to edit the terms later. We publish an interactive map that anyone can pan and read, with the container that rebuilds it and a small primer on how to run it without asking permission. We ask outside groups to test different forward kernels, including ones that imagined slender matter fields or invented vector potentials. If a new kernel explains more contour with fewer free parts, it will win. Models are citizens. The map is the law. By now the chalkboard says what I would not allow earlier. There is a dynamical term missing from our equation, one that locks to Mars geometry, yet does not flow through heat or photons from the sun. Our field is small and stubborn. It favors a wedge and a lobe with an angle that textbooks do not name. If the field exists, our equation is missing a term. I say it quietly, and then I write it large because the next room will not respect whispers. I sit back and look at the contours like river lines on an old atlas. The quiet gathers in a lobe that leans, not where a mirror would, not where a halo would, and not where a sail would take the wind. The null map stays clean, and the predictions point to tests we can run soon enough to be told off by the sky. The field is not a theory. It is a sketch the sky made on our sensors. Under clear stars. The next act belongs to a bracket of ideas strong enough to argue with a map and honest enough to die if the map refuses them. I open a notebook whose title fits on one line, missing term. Then I chalk the first candidate words and cross half of them out. The field does not care about my patience. The mountain has new windows on a page that smells like ink and cold air. We load cases. We keep the oath. We draw the field again. I pin the non-negotiable traits of the missing term to the board. The light curve dips before geometric contact, then shows an echo after exit. Radio shows a quiet trench in the same phase. The effect is independent of frequency across letter L band, letter S band, and light. No increase in polarization appears. The rhythm locks to the angle between Sun, Mars, and the visitor, and it ignores local time and temperature. Any candidate must reproduce both signatures honestly. I sort plausible stories into 3 families. Propagation alters how waves travel, tiny refraction, weak defocusing, or a thin effective opacity that gently trims power. Dynamics applies a geometry-dependent force to the traveler, changing path, or effective cross-section. Thin matter adds dust, a faint ring, or an unusual plasma along the line of sight. Our data favors propagation, doubts thin matter, and demotes dynamics to a last resort. I accept hard astronomical limits before imagination gets a vote. No new term may violate established planetary ephemerides, the Doppler and range records from Mars orbiters, or the standard post-Newtonian tests of gravity in the solar system. A geometry-dependent force strong enough to matter would disturb spacecraft orbits, and we do not see such scars. A thin matter field should imprint strong frequency dependence and polarization, and we do not see that either. Propagation remains standing for now, so I sketch the propagation story. Imagine a weak field tied to Mars geometry that slightly reduces focusing along the line of sight before the limb, shaving power from the beam and softening the step. The effect stays nearly frequency independent and leaves polarization unchanged. Predictions follow. A point spread function that swells before ingress, and a light curve that shows a shallow dip with a brief echo on exit. The dynamic story struggles with time. A force that depends on the Sun, Mars, visitor angle would alter position or effective area more than instantaneous power. The timescale near a hard limb is too short for a gentle acceleration to carve a pre-ingress valley that lines up with the radio trench. Phase would drift from what we measured. Even before we add the global null controls, the match is weak. After those controls, the case collapses completely for me. Thin matter tells a louder story than our data allows. A dust ring or a plasma sheet would alter polarization, and its strength would vary with frequency. Pressure from Mars' shine is far too small. Guard bands came back clean. Global null nights were flat. The fingerprints do not match any matter field. I write the verdict beside that family. Inconsistent with the observations and with the controls we passed. Now I propose a minimal shape, keeping mathematics in words so the room hears intent. Postulate a weak defocusing field whose strength depends on phase angle, position angle around the limb, and impact parameter measured in Mars radii. That field changes an index of transmission, or adds a thin loss that behaves like a lens with negative power. A kernel turns that field into predicted radio depth and width, and optical dip and echo, with Fresnel softening and integration time. Midway, I write the thesis that guides the tests. If there is a missing term, it touches light before it touches mass. That sentence is cold, and it is kind to our data. Light curves flinch. Radio power falls. Orbits stay calm. The order of evidence matters more than my pride, more than style, and more than any hope that tries to outrun the clocks we trusted on the mountain. Next, I design predictions that separate stories. First prediction, widen the frequency span. Add letter K band in radio and add near-infrared light. If the defocusing field is nearly frequency independent, the dip depth after normalization should hold across these bands, while dust or plasma would swing strongly. Measure how the radio trench width changes with frequency to hunt for a small residual gradient that might betray a different mechanism hiding under the geometry we measured in plain view. Second prediction, measure the point spread function with lucky imaging before ingress. A true defocusing field makes the stellar image expand slightly without moving its center. We will run high-speed imaging and fit a point spread function model. Differential photometry cancels atmospheric flicker, so the remaining swell belongs to the sky, not to the dome. Control nights proved the method does not invent valleys when the geometry is wrong. Third prediction, search the archives of the Deep Space Network. Look for dips in signal to noise for Mars spacecraft in letter X band and letter K band at matching geometries. If such dips exist at the right phases and impact parameters, then the field has been with us for years, written off as radio weather because it was small and intermittent. A positive match would not close the case, but it would raise the floor under the propagation story. I add safety rails, so ambition does not break physics. The amplitude must stay small enough to respect energy conservation, since we are talking about transmission, not birth or death of energy or memory. Paths must not bend so much that very long baseline interferometry would have noticed long ago. The Occam penalty inside the Bayesian machinery keeps parameter counts tight and discourages embroidery designed to flatter a favorite idea. Now I draw a box titled Hard Experiment and list what must happen. We schedule a near-limb occultation with a lucky imaging camera that can read point spread function shape in real time, paired with simultaneous radio in letter L band, letter S band, and letter K band. In parallel, we scan the Deep Space Network archives. Rejection rules are explicit. No pre-ingress point spread function swell, no repeat of near independence of frequency, and no signal to noise dense in archives. Whatever touches light must show itself, or the quiet returns to weather, and we begin again. I speak the rule before we begin. This is the no-retreat experiment. If the missing term exists, it must sign 3 facts at once. First, near independence of frequency across letter L band, letter S band, and letter K band after honest normalization. Second, a point spread function that swells before geometric ingress while its center remains still. Third, a dent in signal-to-noise ratio inside archived Deep Space Network passes at matching geometry. Count first, speak later. We set the synchronized configuration in careful steps. Timestamps move from coordinated universal time to barycentric dynamical time. A portable atomic clock feeds 1 pulse per second into the high-speed camera and into the radio recorder through measured cables. Delays per connector are written and signed. Software runs inside a pinned software container whose versions cannot change during the run. Nothing is allowed to drift except the sky. The optical arm carries lucky imaging on its shoulders, and the camera reads hundreds of short frames each second, and a physical model of the point spread function fits core and halo in real time. Focus is held by temperature control and checked on a small star before we commit. The criterion is hard. The point spread function radius grows before ingress and its centroid remains still. Any motion of the center is a strike against us, not against the sky. The radio arm opens 3 ears at once. We watch letter L band, letter S band, and letter K band together, draw dynamic spectra, and check each chain response. Polarimetric mode records the Stokes parameters, yet the decision rests on total power, not on a trick of rotation. The criterion is phase lock. All trenches appear in the same geometry window, and after normalization, show nearly the same depth consistently. Controls travel with us like a second heartbeat. We run an off-window segment where geometry is wrong. We push the beam several arc minutes off target. We scan pretend guard bands beside the real ones where the sky should be quiet. We rotate polarization through its options. Every other parameter is frozen, from exposure time to gain, to processing recipes. The only thing we are allowed to vary is the triangle written by the Sun, Mars, and the visitor. We register thresholds exactly as agreed, minimum trenches and minimum widths. Allowed tolerance on the point spread, function radius change, expected delay between stations from geometry and hardware, early stop rules if weather ruins the test, release policy that promises source code, cryptographic checksums, and a dry summary whether the result sings or shrugs. The red team signs the sheet last. Their quick scrawl looks like a stern warning. Good. The joint pipeline is printed on the wall so panic has a map. Optical frames are corrected for bias, dark current, and flat field, then measured with differential photometry against a comparison star. A fitted point spread function reports radius and ellipticity per frame. Radio chains are calibrated to a stable noise source. Radio frequency interference is flagged with a kurtosis test, and dynamic spectra are rendered. Barycentric dynamical timestamps are aligned across sites, and propagation delays are subtracted. Cross-correlation between stations tests the shared rhythm. Uncertainties are estimated with bootstrap draws and independent reductions. An Occam penalty lives inside the evidence so models that overfit lose. All steps run inside a software container with fixed random seeds. Midway, I write the line that makes the room lean forward. If the point spread function does not swell, the story breaks. We could salvage pride with words but not with numbers. We will accept that verdict if it arrives, and we will publish it with the same care. Saying this aloud tightens the hands of the people who matter most, the ones who keep steady focus, hold temperature, watch vibrations, and count electrons, as if the mountain could hear. Old data wakes while new data arrives. A partner team queries Deep Space Network archives for letter X band and letter K band downlink sessions when phase angle, position angle, and impact parameter matched our windows. They compute signal-to-noise ratio time series with the same care we give the mountain. A dent at the right moments would argue field is not new, only newly heard in routine telemetry. The window opens. The star hardens, the limb approaches, and the celebrity here is the point spread function radius. It swells by a small sliver, then holds that sliver for a handful of frames before the light steps down. The centroid stays steady inside the promised tolerance. I let one breath out, write the times, and move my eyes to radio, grateful and wary in equal measure because relief is a liar and geometry is not, ever, in our work. Radio answers like a practiced choir. In letter L band the trench forms and deepens. Letter S band follows the same slope. Letter K band is noisier but obedient. Normalized depths agree within the bound we set weeks ago when we still suspected we were flattering ourselves. Polarization stays quiet. Total power carries the message, and the timing sits squarely inside the window our printed geometry drew on the console. Controls do their work. Off-window gives flat spectra and flat light curves. Off-target gives flat again. Guard bands stay clean. Polarization games are quiet. The trench remains a citizen of geometry, and the pre-ingress swell remains a citizen of optics. We expected those negatives. We count them anyway and write them on the same sheet as the positives so that absence keeps the authority it earned during the null campaign. Silence that repeats is a result also. The Deep Space Network team calls. Only 2 Mars orbiter passes show shallow dents in signal-to-noise ratio that line up with our predicted moments. Not every pass agrees. Weather, equipment, and link budget change the flavor of noise. The 2 that do agree feel like a hand on the back urging the next step. We add them to the ledger with one word that keeps us honest: tentative. I read the verdict in careful voice. The point spread, function swells before ingress without drifting. Trenches appear together in 3 bands and keep depth after normalization. Archived passes offer small support. The Bayes factor, after the Occam penalty, rises into the strong range for a weak defocusing propagation term. Plan branches follow: confirm and publish now, or, if null had ruled, reject and return, or, if mixed, repeat immediately. Either way, let the Court of Methods convene next week. The hall fills before the hearing begins. A placard at the door repeats our rule: count first, speak later. The panel seats include optical astronomy, radio astronomy, statistics, and celestial mechanics. Every microphone is live, and cameras record with a visible red light. I sit with my notes, the pre-registered plan, and the container instructions that rebuild every figure. The chair gavels once and reminds everyone that method, not rank, holds authority in this room. All statements will be logged. We publish a preprint, a fully reproducible software container, cryptographic checksums, and a clear chain of custody. The document lists pre-registered priors, thresholds, and fixed random seeds. The timeline of null controls appears beside the finished windows. The interactive map of quiet contours is linked. Every file and parameter change has a signature and a date. The room has everything we promised before we set foot on the mountain. Today, the moderator reads the procedure and the limits on time. Conflicts of interest are stated in plain language. Outside groups may run our code on a clean machine at the side bench. Questions must cite a file, a timestamp, or a figure. Answers must point to public material. The chair warns against speeches and demands methods. This is not a press event. This is a session where the audience is invited to break the claim and to break it kindly. The first challenge goes to the beating heart of temptation. Did you pick Windows after seeing a hint? This is the look elsewhere effect and the sin named p-value hacking and hypothesizing after results are known. We answer with pre-registration, with blinded tags, with a blind detector, and with explicit control of multiple comparisons through Bayes factor and through a posterior error rate that we published in advance. Publicly, timing is next. A senior astronomer asks about barycentric dynamical time, coordinated universal time, leap seconds, and the switch between topocentric and inertial frames. We rerun the conversion on the projector with fresh inputs. We align observatory clocks to the portable atomic clock on the cart. Small differences appear, as they must. Phase does not move with them. The geometry of Sun, Mars, and Visitor keeps the beat no matter which human calendar we prefer. The room watches quietly. Radio integrity takes the floor. Reviewers ask about radio frequency interference and about the ionosphere. We show the kurtosis flags that remove machines, the guard band scans that stay clean, and deliberate beam nod tests. We present total electron content and planetary index records. Control nights are flat. The trench appears inside the geometry window. Atmosphere and hardware cannot explain a beat that opens and closes with a triangle. Alone. Optics faces its own cross-examination. Lucky imaging records a point spread function that swells gently before ingress while the centroid remains within tolerance. Differential photometry cancels atmospheric scintillation at the same timescale. The egress shows a faint echo that matches the prediction from the geometry-based field. We show focus stability plots and accelerometer traces. The instrument behaves. The light curve hesitated before the knife and did so more than once. No one objects to those sentences. Today, a physicist stands and asks the hardest simple question. If the effect is real, why does it lock to Mars and not to the Sun? Why should a wedge with a planet carry rhythm while a star that runs the system does not? The room waits without clearing its throat. The chair nods toward me. I say the answer our figures allow, because the geometry speaks and heat does not. We answer with data beyond this hill. The global repetitions show the same phase at longitudes and latitudes. Parallax in ingress and egress timings matches baseline models. A combined Bayesian analysis raises the evidence for the propagation model over instrument and atmosphere. The amplitude refuses to scale with 1 over range squared to the Sun. The phase follows the angle between Sun, Mars, and visitor. The rhythm honors triangles more than heaters. The room writes while I point with care. The Statistics Committee asks for posterior predictive checks and for sensitivity to priors and hyperpriors. We show fake data drawn from the instrument model, the clean edge model, and the propagation model. Only the propagation model reproduces the dip and echo in the right phase. We sweep priors wide and narrow. The ranking of models does not flip inside the pre-registered ranges. Uncertainty on amplitude remains stated in full, publicly. Outside investigators take a turn. They present 2 deep space network downlink sessions in letter X band and letter K band, where signal-to-noise ratio dips shallowly at the predicted moments. They also show many passes that do not display a dent and explain why link budget and weather often mask a small effect. The room absorbs the caveat. Support exists and is limited. It acts like an old whisper that no one thought to measure. Until this week, we address the ethics of the earlier leak and the systems that failed. We commit to one public voice, a visible changelog, and intrusion alarms. We repeat our promise to release null results with the same care as positive results. We ask critics to verify our containers and to propose better tests. I say the sentence that kept us steady on the mountain: count first, speak later, without exception. The council chair reads a summary that could fit on a door. The data deserves testing. No one declares a discovery. The resolution sets a last window with terms: lucky imaging for point spread function shape, synchronized radio in letter L band, letter S band, and letter K band, north and south stations, a parallel sequence of null controls and monitors. If the point spread function swells and multiband trenches repeat at the forecast amplitude, the record moves to peer review. If the null wins, the propagation model H2 is closed. We pack our cases and sharpen our plan. Before the decisive window opens, the council and independent monitors sign the rules: safety, oxygen, cameras. We repeat the sentence that keeps us decent: count first, speak later. Roles pass hand to hand. Northern optics, northern radio, southern radio, timekeeper, auditor. I confirm evacuation paths, battery backups, and cold drives. No speeches. We will measure, we will seal, and we will let the math speak. The mountain hums as if it understands ceremony. Witnesses sign names in ink. Time is locked. Next, we convert coordinated universal time to barycentric dynamical time. The portable atomic clock feeds 1 pulse per second into camera and radio recorders. We measure delay per connector and write it beside our names. The software container is pinned. Versions and random seeds cannot change. Parameters freeze so that geometry alone may move. Independent monitors initial each step and note the minute in the ledger: verified. Optics multiplies its eyes. 2 large telescopes and a small backup align on the star. Lucky imaging captures fast frames. Differential photometry corrects for the air by comparison star. The point spread function is our celebrity tonight. It must swell a little before ingress and keep its centroid still. Focus is held by temperature control, guided by a quiet accelerometer. I repeat the criterion aloud until my voice belongs to it. Seeing steadies, the guiding graph flattens like calm water. Radio opens 3 bands together. Letter L band, letter S band, and letter K band record dynamic spectra. We test bandpass shape and confirm flat calibrations. Polarimetric mode writes Stokes parameters, but the decision rests on total power. The trenches must appear in the same geometry window and, after normalization, keep nearly the same depth. Spectra scroll, like rain on glass. Noon noise remains absent. Only geometry advances the baton. Independence lives in the room. External colleagues install the reproducible container on a clean machine they brought. They sign the chain of custody. We start hash streaming in small blocks that append to a public log. The promise is simple and binding. Whatever the sky says, a minimal release will go out. It will include code, checksums, timelines, and a guide for repeating what we do here without our hands. Independent observers mirror every step and call discrepancies aloud immediately. We read thresholds again, this time slowly. Required depths and widths. Required point spread. Function, swelling, and centroid steadiness. Expected interstation delay. Early stop if weather crosses the line. In parallel, the decoy station runs off window, false bands, beam nods, and polarization rotations. Those controls share our clock, only geometry differs. The ledger grows in tidy loops of ink. We rehearse abort codes and return paths without touching dials. The processing pathways are shown on the wall so panic can never improvise. Photons land as pixels. We subtract bias, dark current, and flat field frames. A physical point spread function model fits core, halo, and ellipticity frame by frame. Differential photometry tracks the comparison star and writes residuals in real time. Radio power is calibrated to a noise source, a kurtosis-based detector flags, radio frequency interference. Dynamic spectra render time versus frequency for each band. Timestamps convert from coordinated universal time to barycentric dynamical time. Geometric delays and cable delays are subtracted. Cross-correlation between baselines measures the shared rhythm. Uncertainties come from bootstrap draws. An Occam penalty waits inside the evidence. All steps run inside the container. I lower the room with one sentence at the knife edge. If geometry sings tonight, we will publish before dawn. The panelists lift their eyes and then lower them to the screens. Fans turn like breath. The mountain wind knocks once and retreats. I touch the corner of the console the way sailors touch a mast. We are inside the window that will choose who we have been for a year. I promise no verdict will outrun the numbers tonight. Countdown begins for ingress. The guiding star holds and frames fall like rain on stone. The point spread. Function radii paint themselves in real time across a small pane. The timekeeper calls T-3, T-2, T-1. My hand hovers over the mark key. A whisper in the intercom names the limb. Nobody moves except the clocks. I breathe twice and steady the tremor inside me. Radio enters the window on cue. Letter L band, letter S band, and letter K band write dense waterfalls. The dynamic spectrum tilts along time and frequency as expected. The auditor stamps the minute and confirms northern and southern delay predictions match. Interstation calls confirm cable and air delays within tolerance. The control stream remains flat. Geometry owns the hour. Nothing else gets a vote. The southern array echoes confirmation. The northern dish nods once. Our wrists stay still together. Small problems tap the glass. A brief thermal alarm chirps, then goes quiet. The secondary mirror shivers and then settles. Power regulators hold their lines. Scripts do not change. Gains do not change. The clocks do not change. We recite the rule that keeps our hands honest. If a knob moves tonight, it will make a mark that a stranger can read. We speak softly to keep courage from spilling. Egress approaches and we prepare the mirror tests. Optics hunts a faint echo while fitting the point spread function after the knife. Radio continues its long file without a break. Data mirror copies to a cold drive in the rack and to a handheld drive the auditor wears like a talisman. Hashes post to the wall display and to the ledger. The wind stays disciplined. The independent monitors watch the mirrors of data march. Nothing escapes the ledger tonight either. We compare to forecasts in quiet voices, neither proud nor small. Barycentric dynamical time stamps align. Propagation delays fall away. We overlay predictions from earlier maps and from the hard experiment plan. The auditor reads pass or fail per criterion into the microphone, but the main screens stay masked from the hall. Only the ledger and the hashes speak in public right now. Forecast envelopes sit like guardrails beside truth. I press the button that closes the room. Locks thump like heartbeats. Hash streams freeze and display their final lines. I lean to the microphone. Lock devices, seal the hashes. Council members, please proceed to the release chamber. Screens drop to black in a soft avalanche. The fans are the last sound, and then my breath. We pick up our notebooks and walk toward the verdict. The hallway smells like cold metal and paper vows. We carry silence carefully home. The council files in. The release room becomes a courtroom of method. The auditor reads the chain of custody aloud from dome doors to cold drives. Our placard stands by the screen. Count first, speak later. Cameras blink, logs roll. I set the folder marked Final Window on the table. The chair says geometry, not drama, decides. I steady my hands and promise to speak only what we can show. We begin by breaking seals without breaking ritual. The auditor projects cryptographic checksums generated minute by minute. Independent monitors compare them to their copies and nod. The reproducible software container's identity hash matches the one we registered. Random seeds match. Version numbers match. The monitors sign one sentence into the record. The data are intact. I breathe once, not as celebration, but as permission to turn the page. Optical results go first. The point spread, function radius climbs gently before geometric ingress. Ellipticity holds. The centroid does not drift. The growth crosses the pre-registered threshold with room to spare. After the knife passes, a faint echo appears on egress. Focus and accelerometer logs sit beneath the plot. No knob moved, no temperature step hides in the margins. The light hesitated before the knife as a weak defocusing field would. Radio results follow across 3 bands. In letter L band, letter S band, and letter K band, synchronized dynamic spectra show trenches that open and close inside the geometric window. After normalization, depths agree within the bound we signed. Guard band scans remain flat. Deliberate beam nods are flat. Polarization channels show no tricks. Total power carries the message in phase. The triangle wrote the timing. Instruments obeyed. Timing binds the room to the sky. North and south streams share one barycentric dynamical timeline and are corrected for propagation and cable delay. Cross-correlation between the site's peaks at the delay predicted by air and wire. Off-window streams recorded at the same time stay flat. The auditor stamps the line where the peak rises and reads, correct phase, correct delay. I write the time. Outside evidence is allowed and contained. 2 deep space network downlinks in letter X band and letter K band show small dents in signal-to-noise ratio at the angles we forecast. Many passes do not. The team quantifies weather and link budget and shows why a weak effect can drown. We call the support real and limited, and the room accepts those words without debate. The chair writes tentative in the margin. Now we weigh models as in the war room. The instrument and atmosphere story is H0. The clean edge story is H1. The weak propagation story is H2. We compute marginal likelihoods with an Occam penalty, then form Bayes factors. The factor comparing H2 to H0 crosses the line we set as strong. The factor comparing H2 to H1 stays above 1. Posterior odds favor the propagation term. Midway, the chair asks for the one sentence that will live beyond this room. I stand and speak slowly so I can own it. We do not declare a discovery, we declare temporary reproducible evidence for a geometry-locked propagation effect near Mars. The words feel exact and narrow. I let the silence run to prove we will not sweeten them. The council nods, and we turn back to the ledger. The council votes on a resolution. Publish a temporary finding, invite independent repetition, and schedule 3 new windows across latitude. A temporary name is allowed so we can write papers without poetry. The monitors suggest a neutral phrase, quiet yield. I add it to the slide only once to keep the story from running away. The council asks that we include every threshold, seed, and failure beside the plots. We agree. Transparency rules the next steps. We will post a second version of the preprint with complete methods, a link to the container, and a checksum for every file. We will release barycentric dynamical time conversion logs and calibration notes that usually stay in drawers. Our frequently asked questions will refuse grand labels. The change log will remain visible even when it embarrasses us. If honest work contradicts us, the record will not break. A minority opinion is read into the record with care. The effect sizes are small, and weather still whispers in ways we may not have measured. The minority proposes bright lines for withdrawal if two new windows produce clean null at forecast geometry, or if point spread, function swelling fails to repeat, the propagation model H2 will be closed. The Council accepts the condition as a test of pride. I write it on the board. Thanks are offered without confetti. Northern and Southern optics. Northern and Southern radio. Independent monitors who never raised their voices. The team who read the Deep Space Network archives line by line. The red team who tried to break the story and will try again in public. We assign leads for the next run and for the global replication package. We set dates before anyone can decide to rest on a headline. We place the evidence one last time. Optical hesitation before the knife without centroid drift. Multiband trenches that keep depth after normalization. Correct phase and delay across baselines, tentative support from deep space telemetry, a combined analysis that punishes embroidery and still prefers the propagation term. Then the chair closes the folder and points to the door. The hearing is over. The experiment is not. The city and its noise wait outside. Phones vibrate as the room dissolves into circles of colleagues. Invitations and critiques arrive in the same minute. Winter sun finds the window and brightens the carpet like a verdict. I close my notebook and press one finger to the sentence on its first page. Count first, speak later. We will tell the story in that order or not tell it at all. The aftershocks belong to the world beyond the dome. Phones buzz. Emails pile higher than coffee cups. Headlines sprint ahead of our measured prose. Some shout discovery, some whisper hoax. I stand in the doorway and write the sentence that will not bend on a whiteboard. Count first, speak later. We gather on a quick call. We assign roles. We choose one voice. We choose one tempo. We choose one map from question to source. The storm outside the dome keeps its color. Inside, method keeps its shape. Still, one spokesperson answers requests with notes cleared by the team. Every reply links to the preprint version 2, the reproducible software container, cryptographic checksums, and a page of frequently asked questions. We pin a rule to the top of every message, no speculation beyond data. If a question wanders, we walk it back to a figure, a timestamp, or a method. Calm is policy, not a mood. Every time, always. Live television asks the blunt question, is this a discovery or not? I repeat the sentence we voted to carry. Temporary, reproducible evidence. A graphic on screen shows the phase defined by Sun, Mars, and the visitor. Another graphic shows no trend with distance to the Sun. I speak in short lines that match heartbeats. I point to methods, not promises. When I ask viewers to rebuild the figures at home, evidence is hospitality. Anyone may knock. We keep it plain. Social media invents a conspiracy by noon. A thread claims we edited clocks. A video claims the mountain is haunted by wishful thinking. We answer with links to the public repository and to a short tutorial that explains barycentric dynamical time and the point spread function. We show how null controls erase the supposed pattern. We invite critics to run the container. Flags quiet when buttons work. Tools calm storms. Colleagues write with kindness and with clause. One group proposes an alternative forward kernel and attaches a sketch. Another offers to run a blind replication on their mountain if we will send the container and the hashes. Graduate students invite us to a journal club with a promise to be rude to methods, not to people. We thank everyone, trace invitations to tasks, and open a channel for pull requests that change code in public. Sharp help is still help. The team asks for a line we can carry into noise. I give it and make it short enough to remember in a hallway. When silence is called a conspiracy, we answer with numbers. We back that promise with a live reproducibility dashboard that tracks builds, checksums, and figure dates. If a plot moves, the log will say when, why, and who. Quiet earns trust when it is traceable, always. We protect the humans first. A code of conduct moves from paper into action. We open a private hotline. We remind everyone to use two-factor authentication and to remove personal contact details from public pages. We rotate shifts, keep rest days sacred, and log every harassing message with timestamps. No one argues in public. No one answers bait. We keep receipts, we keep kindness, and we keep doors open for help. Safety is method's eldest sibling, not decoration, ever. A funding agency requests a short report. A legislative committee invites a briefing. We prepare slides that show null controls running beside signal windows, Bayes factor thresholds, and the plan for independent repetition. We forbid the word discovery on every page. We say temporary evidence each time. We bring a one-page glossary for non-specialists. We practice until our pauses are steady and our voices match the measurements. Exactly. Amateur astronomy clubs ask how to help without telescopes that cost as much as a street. We assemble a community replication kit. It includes simulated data, a guide to running off window tests, and a simple guard band exercise with public radio recordings. We schedule an online night school on barycentric dynamical time, on the point spread function, and on what a null result means. Curiosity becomes participation. Participation becomes a witness. We trade jargon for plain tools and patience. We push a second minor revision of the preprint. Version 2.1 adds uncertainties in larger type, an expanded posterior predictive check, and an explicit caveat about the limits of deep space network support. The changelog stays public and sharp. Typos are fixed in daylight. Assumptions are dated. When a method improves, the older figure is kept with a note that says what changed and why. No erasures. After the noise, I drive back to the mountain in a borrowed truck and park below the dome. Sunset thins into metal blue. Inside the control room, the air tastes like old dust and promises. I write the oath again on a page I will not tear out. Count first, speak later. I stand before the ISO quiet map and trace one contour with a finger. New windows wait like unlit rooms. I lock them in my calendar tonight already. I shut down the consoles and carry the notebook to the door. The city below begins to glow like a quiet constellation. Reporters will call again tomorrow. Colleagues will argue. Students will send code that outpaces my own. That is the right kind of aftershock. I breathe. I look at Mars, not at headlines. After the noise, only geometry remains. The story now needs an ending shaped by windows, soon. I leave the release room with my notebook and the sentence that survived every storm. Count first, speak later. The city murmurs below. In the corridor, the fans sound like duty shaped into wind. Endings do not explode. Endings settle. I step outside and look east where dawn is a rumor against stone. If music remains in this story, it should take the tempo of method, not the drum of fame. I go down the stairs lighter than I came. Here is the science I can say in one breath. The point spread function swelled before ingress while its centroid held still. Radio showed trenches in letter L band, letter S band, and letter K band. Barycentric, dynamical time and delays matched. Control nights were flat, that is null. A Bayes factor favored a propagation term over both instrument and atmosphere. What we do not have, mechanism and equation yet. I look back over the road that made a verdict possible. We followed every timestamp through the chain of custody from dome to disk. We locked our tools inside a reproducible container and signed each figure with a checksum. Window, then null, then window again. North and south. Optical and radio. We let boredom win over drama. We let clocks raise their hands before mouths did. We built patience into the plan so it could hold when people could not. Limits remain, and I list them without apology. The effect is small, and the air can be moody. Deep space network support was real and limited. Some nights were worse than careful planning deserved. A weak thing needs more nights than a loud one, and more humility than a speech can hold. We can carry that weakness if we remember what it buys. A chance to be right without noise. We turned noise into tools. One voice, a second version of the preprint, and then a small revision. A container anyone can run. Checksums for every file. A a public frequently asked questions, and a changelog that does not hide our mistakes. If you ask a hard question, we answer with numbers and with steps you can repeat. Science is not an oracle. Science is a door. You are allowed to knock. Every link points to methods. Figures carry provenance. I stamp my profession into a vow. I love the slow write more than the fast, pretty. When I must choose between what is beautiful and what is true, I choose to count. If the words on a slide try to outrun the figures win always. If my fear asks for a shortcut, the clocks say no. A life in this craft is fewer promises and more receipts. I teach with things that fit in a pocket. Barycentric dynamical time becomes a sundial and a roadmap across the solar system. A laser pointer and a misted glass explain a point spread function to a room of teenagers without a telescope. A cup of water on a table mates null. I ask questions and wait in silence until a hand goes up. Children understand geometry before they understand algebra. I try to remember when adults forget most days. A team is not a slogan, it is a shelter together. We kept two-factor authentication on. We practiced a code of conduct and rotated shifts. We thanked the red team because doubt is not treason here. We taped names to the case. We logged every ugly message and filed flame under weather. We went home when tired and came back when ready, and the work did not punish waiting. The map on the wall holds more white space than ink. Our ISO quiet contours hum where we traced them and fade where we did not. We mark new windows with ink the color of patience. We write nights and hours so sleep can be part of the experiment. We list which mountains can see which geometry long before the weather report. The map is a promise to return, not a trophy. I will return, and I will bring friends. I practice a heresy and speak to the field as it could answer. If you are a weak defocusing presence, keep your angle. If you prefer triangles to temperatures, keep your wedge. I will bring letter car band and near-infrared light, focus and seeing. I will bring strangers with no reason for kindness. If nothing appears, we will write 0, and the word will weigh the same as yes. We did not discover a thing, we built a standard. The standard says containers for analysis that anyone can run. The standard says barycentric dynamical time conversion logs in the open. The standard says null controls beside every highlight. The standard says Bayes factor thresholds pre-registered where a critic can find them. The standard says checksums and version numbers and readable notebooks. The standard says the shortest road from a claim to a test is a public map for all. I climb the dome and touch cold metal. Mars hangs low and red, a winter punctuation. The wind sounds like fans. The fans sound like waves. I write one last line for tonight. Geometry decides. Counters bear witness. I close the book so the sentence stays put while the sky works. I laugh because the sky does not need my help. I breathe slowly until my hands are quiet again. Morning thins the east into silver. I lock the door, carry the cold drive, and pocket a pen that writes in rain. The city will ask. Schools will ask. People who love the sky will ask. I will answer with numbers, with registered windows, and with a silence that carries edges and shape. If one night the point spread function does not swell and the trench does not form, I will write wrong and begin again. If one night geometry sings the song, we will sing on time. That is enough ending for me. The rest belongs to the sky.